Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Okay. Alright. Hi, guys. So, we're going to be doing the community challenge today that you all wanted to check out. Or not check out, but that you all raised the channel points for. I can still see chat, don't worry. You're all good. So, this is the book we're going to read. It's The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell. It's by Chris Colfer, the one who played Kurt from Glee, I believe, is the one who made this book. It's actually a series. I think it has 4 or 5 books. I'm not too sure. Yeah, there he is. There's 2 of the other books, and I know there's a couple more. So this is the book we're going to be reading. I kind of have some stuff under here that probably should not be seen. Let's just go ahead and move that. If you all wanted to meet my dog, there she is. She's currently biting my finger. Say hi. Hi. Hey, yo. Anyway, this is mainly so like it could end up being in the VODs, and then y'all can check it out from there. It's not gonna be too big of a stream. I don't know how long it'll take me to read the book, obviously, but this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna read. It sounds really, really weird that want me to read, but it's fine. So again, don't worry, guys. I can see chat and everything. Like, here's the chat, here's the laptop and everything. So we're good. There might be a short delay and everything, but other than that, we should be good. I'm gonna wait for a little bit just so it actually puts that I'm live on here, because it should be putting it soon. Anyway, how have you guys been? How has your day been? How was your day? How have you been? I want to apologize for not having streamed for, I think, almost a week now. My Xbox really got me frustrated, and then this week was fine, but mentally I wasn't doing well since, got frustrated with the Xbox and everything. But hopefully we'll be good for this coming week. But I did want to come back with this stream, the book, so you all can get the challenge that you wanted. Ow, ow, ow. Please stop. If you all want to see the little pupper, she's right here. She loves to bite me. Loves to bite me. Absolutely loves it. Believes it's the best thing in the world. Look at her go. She's so adorable. Please let me go. Thank you. Okay. It's really weird. I don't know why it's not doing, giving out the announcement. It should be giving out the announcement. Oh, there it is. Okay, good. Hey, Cell, how's it going? You're snacking away. Hey, Abel, how's it going? How you doing? Is this what I think it is? Yes, this is what you think it is. This is a community challenge award that you all raised money for. Or, not money, but, I'm good. I'm doing okay. I got a little frustrated with the Xbox last week, so, I wasn't doing well mentally, but I'm okay now. I missed you too. I popped in and out of your streams. I just wasn't talking because I didn't really feel like talking too much. Yes, so it's the readings. Hey Day or hey Belle, how's it going? How you doing? So this, if you don't know what this is, Belle, this is the community challenge reward. Everyone raised 10K to read this book, or not this specific book, but for me to read something to them. So we're doing this book currently. I hope you all like it. Again, it's The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell. It's the first book in the series by Chris Colfer. If y'all don't really remember who he is, he's right here. He's from Glee. No, yeah. He's from Glee. Here are the other 2 books, just in case you end up liking this story. This one was $8. It wasn't that much. I mean, it's paperback, though. So, just so you kind of get an idea of what the story's going to be about before I start it. Alex and Connor Bailey's world is about to change. When the twins' grandmother gives them a treasured fairy tale book, they have no idea they're about to enter a land beyond all imagining. The land of stories, where fairy tales are real. So, that's the basic of the actual story. My pupper is playing with a toy currently, so forgive me if you hear that noise from the toy. So this is the front of the book. Did I give it twice? Oh, that's weird. Okay. So we're going to be reading this book. Again, I hope you all enjoy it. Yes, the cover actually does look amazing. It has so much detailed artwork. Like, look, here's the big red wolf. There's the 2 fairies, a frog. There's the kids. Over here is one of the princesses. Over here is another. Here's the spindle. The castle in the background. The tower. The beanstalk over here. It's really cool. Okay, so we're going to get started with this book. So, again, Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell. This is the little map, so you can kind of tell where everything is. If you all want to take like a screenshot of it or take a picture of it or anything, so you can know like kind of where they're going in their journey, you can check it out. So we have the Charming Kingdom, we have the Fairy Kingdom, we have the Sleeping Kingdom, we have Red Riding Hood Kingdom, Northern Kingdom, and then the Elf Empire, Dwarf Forest, the Corner Kingdom, the Troll and Goblin Territory, Mermaid Bay, and a hidden place up there in the corner. So again, this is just the little map that comes with it. Yes, it's story time. Welcome in, welcome in. Just giving everyone a chance to take a picture of the little map, so if anyone wants to know where they're going in the story, they can, obviously follow along with this. It's cute. It comes with this, and then it also comes with a little compass. This is The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell. And then this is the little dedication he had. To Grandma for being my first editor and giving me the best writing advice I've ever received. Christopher, I think you should wait until you're done with elementary school before worrying about being a failed writer. I'm already liking Mermaid Bay. Yeah, that was one of the first ones I liked too. So forgive me if I'm not able to keep up with chat while I read the book. It's just I don't want to break the story up for you guys. I'll probably stop either every chapter or every other chapter, just so you guys can, listen to the story in a flow. Someday you'll be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. C.S. Lewis. So here's the picture. Prologue, The Queen's Visit. The dungeon was a miserable place. Light was scarce and flickered from the torches bolted to the stone walls. Foul-smelling water dripped inside from the moat circling the palace above. Large rats chased each other across the floor searching for food. This was no place for a queen. It was just past midnight and all was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of a chain. Through the heavy silence... Hold on. My dog is biting me. Sorry. Through the heavy silence, a single set of footsteps echoed throughout the halls as someone climbed down the spiral steps into the dungeon. A young woman emerged down the steps, dressed head to toe in a long emerald cloak. She cautiously made her way past the rows of cells, sparking the interest of the prisoners inside. With every step she took, her pace became slower and slower, and her heart beat faster and faster. The prisoners were arranged according to crime. The deeper she walked into the dungeon, the crueler and more dangerous the criminals became. Her sights were set on the cell at the very end of the hall, where a prisoner of special interest was being watched by a large private guard. The woman had come to ask a question. It was a simple question, but it consumed her thoughts every day, kept her lying awake most nights, and was the only thing she dreamed about with the little sleep she managed. Only one person could give her the answer she needed, and that person was on the other side of the prison bars ahead. "I wish to see her," the cloaked woman said to the guard. "No one is allowed to see her," the guard said, almost amused by the request. "I'm on strict orders from the royal family." The woman lowered her hood and revealed her face. Her skin was as pale as snow, her hair was as dark as coal, and her eyes were as green as a forest. Her beauty was known throughout the land, and her story was known even beyond that. "Your Majesty, please forgive me." The stunned guard apologized. He quickly bent into an overly pronounced bow. "I wasn't expecting anyone from the palace." "No apology necessary," she said, "but please do not speak of my presence here tonight." "Of course," the guard said, nodding. The woman faced the bars, waiting for them to be raised, but the guard hesitated. "Are you sure you want to go in there, Your Highness?" the guard said. "There's no telling what she's capable of." "I must see her," the woman said, "at any cost." The guard began turning a large circular lever, and the bars of the cell rose. The woman took a deep breath and continued past them. She journeyed through a longer, darker hallway, where a series of bars and barriers were raised and then lowered after she walked past them. Finally, she reached the end of the hall. The last set of bars was raised, and she stepped into the cell. The prisoner was a woman. She sat on a stool in the center of the cell and stared up at a small window. The prisoner waited a few moments before acknowledging the visitor behind her. It was the first visitor she had ever had, and she knew who it was without looking. There was only one person it could be. "Hello, Snow White," the prisoner said softly. "Hello, stepmother," Snow White replied with a nervous quiver. "I hope you are well." Although Snow White had rehearsed exactly what she wanted to say, she was now finding it nearly impossible to speak. "I heard that you are queen now," her stepmother said. "It's true," said Snow White. "I've inherited the throne as my father intended." "So to what do I owe this honor? Have you come to watch me wither away?" her stepmother said. There was such authority and power in her voice. It was known to make the strongest men melt like ice. "On the contrary," Snow White said, "I've come to understand." "To understand what?" her stepmother asked harshly. "Why?" Snow White hesitated. Why you did what you did." And with this finally said, Snow White felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. She had finally asked the question that had been so strongly on her mind. Half of the challenge was over. "There are many things about this world that you don't understand," the stepmother said, and turned to look at her stepdaughter. It was the first time in a long time that Snow White had seen her stepmother's face. It was the face of a woman who had once possessed beauty without flaw, and the face of a woman who had once been queen. Now, the woman sitting before her was just a prisoner, whose looks had faded into permanent, sorrowful scowl. "That may be," Snow White said, "but can you blame me for trying to some sort of reason behind your actions?" The recent years of Snow White's life had become the most scandalous of the kingdom's royal history. Everyone knew the story of the fur princess who had taken refuge with the 7 dwarves while hiding from her jealous stepmother. Everyone knew of the infamous poisoned apple and the dashing prince who saved Snow White from false death. The story was simple, but the aftermath was not. Even with a new marriage and a monarchy to occupy her time, Snow White found herself constantly wondering if the theories of her stepmother's vanity were true. Something inside the new queen refused to believe that someone could be so malicious. "Do you know what they're calling you out there?" Snow White asked. "Outside these prison walls, the world refers to you as the evil queen." "If that is what the world has labeled me, then that is the name I shall learn to live with," the evil queen said. "Once the world has made a decision, there is little anyone can do to change its mind." Snow White was astonished by how little her stepmother cared. But Snow White needed her to care. She needed to know there was some humanity left in her. "They wanted to execute you after they discovered your crimes against me. The whole kingdom wanted you dead." Snow White's voice faded to a faint whisper as she fought off the emotions building up inside her. But I wouldn't allow it. I couldn't. Am I supposed to thank you for sparing me? The Evil Queen asked. If you expect someone to fall at your feet and express gratitude, you've come to the wrong cell. I didn't do it for you. I did it for myself, Snow White said. Like it or not, you are the only mother I have ever known. I refuse to believe that you are the soulless monster the rest of the world claims you to be. Whether it's true or not, I believe that there is a heart deep down inside of you. Tears rolled down Snow White's pale face. She had promised herself she would stay strong, but she had lost control of her emotions once she was in her stepmother's presence. Then I'm afraid you're wrong, the Evil Queen said. The only soul I've ever had died a long time ago, and the only heart you'll ever find in my possession is a heart of stone. The Evil Queen did indeed have a heart of stone, but not inside her. A rock in the shape and size of a human heart was on a small table in the corner of the cell. It was the only item the Evil Queen had been permitted to keep when she was arrested. Snow White recognized the stone from her childhood. It had always been very precious to her stepmother, and the Evil Queen had never let it out of her sight. Snow White had never been allowed to touch it or hold it, but nothing was stopping her now. She walked across the cell, picked it up, and curiously stared down at it. It brought back so many memories. All the neglect and sadness her stepmother had caused her as a child rushed through her. All my life, I only wanted one thing, Snow White said. Your love. When I was a girl, I used to spend hours hiding in the palace just hoping you would notice I was missing, but you never did. You spent your days in your chambers with your mirrors and your skin creams and this stone. You spent more time with strangers with anti-aging methods than you did with your own daughter. But why? The Evil Queen did not answer. You tried to kill me 4 times, 3 of which you attempted yourself, Snow White said, shaking her head in disbelief. When you dressed as an old woman and came to me at the dwarf's cottage, I knew it was you. I knew you were dangerous, but I kept letting you in. I kept hoping that you would change. I let you harm me. Snow White had never confessed this to anyone, and she couldn't help but bury her face in the palms of her hands and cry after saying it. You think you know heartbreak? The Evil Queen said so sharply that it startled her stepdaughter. You know nothing of pain. You never received affection from me, but from the moment you were born you were loved by the whole kingdom. Others, however, are not so fortunate. Others, Snow White, sometimes have the only loves they've ever known taken away from them. Snow White didn't know what to say. What love was she referring to? Are you speaking of my father? Snow White asked. The Evil Queen closed her eyes and shook her head. Naivety is such a privileged trait. Believe it or not, Snow White, I had my own life before I came into yours. Snow White grew quiet and slightly ashamed. Of course she knew her stepmother had had a life prior to marrying her father, but she had never considered what it had consisted of. Her stepmother had always been such a private person. Snow White never had reason to. Where is my mirror? The Evil Queen demanded. It's to be destroyed, Snow White told her. Suddenly, the Evil Queen's stone became much heavier in Snow White's hand. Snow White didn't know if this was really happening or if she was just imagining it. Her arm became tired from holding the stone heart, and she had to put it aside. There's so much you're not telling me, Snow White said. There's so many things you've kept from me all these years. The Evil Queen lowered her head and stared at the ground. She remained silent. I may be the only person in the world with any compassion for you. Please tell me it isn't going to waste, Snow White pleaded. If there were events in your past that influenced your recent decisions, please explain them to me. Still, there was no response. I'm not leaving here until you tell me, Snow White yelled, raising her voice for the first time in her life. Fine, the Evil Queen said. Snow White took a seat on another stool in the cell. The Evil Queen waited a moment before beginning, and Snow White's anticipation grew. Your story will forever be romanticized, she told Snow White. No one will ever think twice about mine. I will continue to be degraded into nothing but a grotesque villain until the end of time. But what the world fails to realize is that a villain is just a victim whose story hasn't been told. Everything I have done, my life's work, my crimes against you, has all been for him. Snow White felt her own heart grow heavy. Her head was spinning, and curiosity had taken over her entire body. Who? She asked so quickly that she forgot to hold back the desperation in her voice. The Evil Queen closed her eyes and let her memories surface. Images of places and people that from her past flew out from the back of her mind like fireflies in a cave. There was so much she had seen in her younger years, so many things she wished she remembered, and so many things she wished to forget. I will tell you about my past, or at least the past of someone I once was, but consider yourself warned. My story is not one that ends with a happily ever after. Okay, guys, so that's the prologue. It's not too short, not too long. This is the next chapter. It's chapter 1. This is the picture for it. Once upon a time. Hey, Ranger. What's up? Welcome in. Sorry I didn't get to welcome you in earlier. I was on the prologue. This is deep. Yes, this is very deep. It's a very deep story. As you can see, Ranger, we're doing the challenge, or not the challenge, but the thing that you all raised for. We're reading The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell by Chris Colfer. Just as a reminder. I already showed the map earlier on, but we're just reading this. I'm going either chapter by chapter or every 2 chapters. Currently, I went just from the prologue to chapter 1 since it's, just a little space in between. I believe everyone so far likes the story. I'm not too sure. If y'all wanted to see the little pupper, here she is. She's having the time of her life over here. She's biting my finger. little, what's it called? Oh, thank you. You did, you babies. You like being on camera, Mama? She's like, what is this thing? Yes, I have many tattoos. I have these tattoos. I have another one on the other side. And then I have this one over here. So I do have another one on my hand, but or not my hand, on my leg. You're right, I need a blanket. Yeah, Sarah has seen all my tattoos like literally the day after I got them. So say hi. She's just chilling here, being a little cutie. Okay. And for anyone wondering, yes, I do have, yes, this is my things. This is my desk, currently. I have this, so I have water and I have soda, so I'm good. Yes, Totoro is right there. It was given to me for my birthday. It's very adorable. Wait, did you just do a face reveal? No, I didn't do a face reveal. I'm just showing you my little pupper, and I was showing my desk. No, I was just showing my desk. It's just the stuff I have here. I have little Togepi. And I was saying that I have water and soda, so I'm good for drinking stuff. Stare at the reflections, yes. Can see my somewhat of a reflection. Thank you, Sal, for deleting the bot. Okay. Okay. So we'll go on with chapter 1. Depending on how long it is, I'll either stop after the chapter or I will continue on to the next chapter. Can you go play so I can read? Yeah? Yeah, you. Okay. Once upon a time, Miss Peters said to her 6th grade class, "These are the most magical words our world has ever known, and the gateway into the greatest stories ever told. They're an immediate calling to anyone who hears them, a calling into a world where everyone is welcome and anything can happen. Mice can become men, maids can become princesses, and they teach valuable lessons in the process. Alex Bailey eagerly sat straight up in her seat. She usually enjoyed her teacher's lessons, but this was something especially close to her heart. Fairy tales are much more than silly bedtime stories, the teacher continued. The solution to almost every problem imaginable can be found in the outcome of a fairy tale. Fairy tales are life lessons disguised with colorful characters and situations. The Boy Who Cried Wolf teaches us the value of a good reputation and the power of honesty. Cinderella shows us the rewards of having a good heart. The Ugly Duckling teaches us the meaning of inner beauty. Alex's eyes were wide, and she nodded in agreement. She was a pretty girl, with bright blue eyes and short strawberry blonde hair that was always kept neatly out of her face with a headband. The way the other students stared at their teacher, as if the lesson being taught were in another language, was something Miss Peters had never grown accustomed to. So, Miss Peters would often direct entire lessons to the front row, where Alex sat. Mrs. Peters was a tall, thin woman who always wore dresses that resembled old, patterned sofas. Her hair was dark and curly and sat perfectly on the top of her head like a hat, and her students often thought it was. Through a pair of thick glasses, her eyes were permanently squinted from all the judgmental looks she had given her classes over the years. Sadly, these timeless tales are no longer relevant in our society, Mrs. Peters said. We have traded their brilliant teachings for small-minded entertainment like television and video games. Parents now let obnoxious cartoons and violent movies influence their children. The only exposure to the tales some children acquire are versions bastardized by film companies. Fairy tale adaptations are usually stripped of every moral and lesson the stories were originally intended to teach, and replaced with the singing and dancing forest animals. I recently read that films are being created depicting Cinderella as a struggling hip-hop singer and Sleeping Beauty as a warrior princess battling zombies. Awesome, a student behind Alex whispered to himself. Alex shook her head. Hearing this made her soul hurt. She tried to share her disapproval with her fellow classmates, but sadly her concern was not reciprocated. I wonder if the world would be a different place if everyone knew these tales in the way the Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen intended them to be known, Mrs. Peters said. I wonder if people would learn from the Little Mermaid's heartbreak when she dies at the end of her real story. I wonder if there would be so many kidnappings if children were shown the true dangers that Little Red Riding Hood faced. I wonder if delinquents would be so inclined to misbehave if they knew about the consequences Goldilocks caused for herself with the three bears. There is so much to learn and prevent for our futures if we just open our eyes to past teachings. Perhaps if we embraced fairy tales as much as we could, it would be much easier to find our own happily ever afters. If Alex had her way, Mrs. Peters would be rewarded with thunderous applause after each lesson she gave. Unfortunately, all that followed her classes was a mutual sigh of relief among the students, thankful that they were over. Let's see how well you all know your fairy tales, the teacher said with a smile, and began pacing the room. In Rumpelstiltskin, what did the young maiden's father tell the king that his daughter could spin hay into? Does anyone know? Mrs. Peters scanned the classroom like a shark looking for a wounded fish. Only one student raised her hand. Yes, Miss Bailey, Miss Peters called. He claimed she could spin hay into gold, Alex said. Very good, Miss Bailey, Mrs. Peters said. If she had a favorite student, not that she would ever admit to having one, Alex would have been it. Alex was always eager to please. She was the definition of a bookworm. It didn't matter what time of day it was, before school, during school, after school, before bed, she was always reading. She had thirst for knowledge, and because of it, Alex was usually the first person to answer Mrs. Peters' questions. She tried her best to impress her classmates with every chance she got, putting extra effort into each book report and class presentation she was assigned. However, this usually annoyed the other students, and Alex was often teased for it. She constantly heard other girls making fun of her behind her back. She usually spent lunch alone under a tree somewhere with an open library book. Although she would never tell anyone, Alex was so lonely that sometimes it hurt. Now, can anyone tell me what the compromise was that the maiden made with Rumpelstiltskin? Alex waited a moment before putting her hand up. She didn't want to seem like a total teacher's pet. Yes, Miss Bailey. In exchange for turning the hay into gold, the maiden promised to give Rumpelstiltskin her firstborn child when she became queen, Alex explained. That's a pretty steep deal, said a boy behind Alex. What's a creepy old short man want with a baby anyway? A girl next to him asked. Obviously he couldn't adopt with a name like Rumpelstiltskin, another student added. Did he eat the baby? Someone else asked nervously. Alex turned around to face her clueless peers. You're all missing the point of the story, Alex said. Rumpelstiltskin took advantage of the maiden because she was in need. The story is about the price of a bad negotiation. What are we willing to give up long-term in the future for something short-term in the present? Get it? If Mrs. Peters could change her facial expression, she would have looked very proud. Nicely put, Miss Bailey, she said. I must say, in all my years of teaching, I rarely come across a pupil with as much in-depth knowledge as a loud snore suddenly came from the back of the class. A boy in the back row was slouched over his desk and drooling from the corner of his mouth, very much asleep. Alex had a twin brother, and it was moments like these that made her wish she didn't. Mrs. Peters diverted her attention to him like a paperclip to a magnet. Mr. Bailey? Mrs. Peter asked. He continued to snore. Mr. Bailey? Mrs. Peter asked again, kneeling down closer to him. He let out another enormous snore. A few of the students wondered how is it possible for such a loud noise to come out of him. Mr. Bailey! Mrs. Peters shouted in his ear. As if someone had lit a firework under his seat, Connor Bailey jumped back to life, almost knocking his desk over. Where am I? What happened? Connor asked in a panicked state of confusion. His eyes darted around the room while his brain tried to remember where he was. Like his sister, he also had bright blue eyes and strawberry blonde hair. His face was round and freckled, and at that moment slightly smushed to one side like a basset hound when it first wakes up from a nap. Alex couldn't have been more embarrassed by her brother. Besides sharing looks and birthday, she and her brother couldn't have been more different. Connor may have had a lot of friends, but unlike his sister, he had trouble in school. Mostly trouble staying awake. I'm so glad you could rejoin us, Mr. Bailey, Mrs. Peters said sternly. Did you have a nice nap? Connor turned bright red. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Peters, he apologized, trying to be as genuine as possible. Sometimes when you talk for long periods of time, I doze off. No offense, I can't help it. You fall asleep in my class at least twice a week, Mrs. Peters reminded him. Well, you do talk a lot. Before he could stop himself from saying it, Connor knew it was the wrong thing to say. A few of the students had to bite their hands to stop from laughing. I recommend you stay awake while I teach, Mr. Bailey, Mrs. Peters threatened. Connor had never seen anyone squint with their eyes so tight without shutting them before. Unless you know enough about fairy tales to teach this lesson yourself, she added. I probably do, Connor said. Once again, he spoke without thinking. I mean, I know a lot about this stuff, that's all. Oh, really? Mrs. Peters never backed down from a challenge, and every student's worst nightmare was that they'd be her challenge. All right, Mr. Bailey, if you're so knowledgeable, answer this question. Connor gulped. In the original tale of Sleeping Beauty, how many years did the princess sleep before she was awoken by True Love's first kiss? Mrs. Peters asked, studying his face. All eyes were on him, impatiently waiting for the slightest indication that he didn't know the answer. But fortunately for Connor, he did. 100, Connor answered. Sleeping Beauty slept for 100 years. That's why the castle grounds were covered in vines and stuff, because the curse affected everyone in the kingdom, and there was no one in the garden. Mrs. Peters didn't know what to say or do. She frowned down at him, immensely surprised. This was the first time he had ever been correct when she had put him on the spot, and she certainly hadn't expected it. Try to stay conscious, Mr. Bailey. Lucky for you, I used my last attention slip this morning. But I can always request more, Mrs. Peters said, and promptly walked to the front of the classroom to continue her lesson. Connor sighed with relief, and the red drained from his face. His eyes met his sister's. Even she was surprised he had gotten the answer right. Alex hadn't expected Connor to remember any fairy tales. Now, class, I want you all to get out your literature books, turn to page 170, and read Little Red Riding Hood quietly to yourselves, Mrs. Peters instructed. The students did as they were told. Connor made himself as comfortable as possible at his desk and began reading. The story, the pictures, and the characters were all so familiar to him. One of the things Alex and Connor looked forward to the most was when they were young and had been on trips to see their grandmother. She lived up in the mountains, in the heart of the woods, in a tiny house that could be best described as a cottage, if such a thing still existed. It was a long journey, a few hours by car, but the twins loved every minute of it. Their anticipation would grow as they traveled up the windy roads and through the endless trees. When they crossed a yellow bridge, the twins would excitedly exclaim, "We're almost there! We're almost there!" Once they arrived, their grandmother would greet them at the door with open arms and hugs so tight they would almost pop. "Look at you two! You've both grown a foot since the last time I saw you," Grandma would say, even if they hadn't, and then would lead them inside, where a freshly baked batch of cookies would wait for them. Their father had grown up in the woods and would spend hours each day telling the twins his adventures as a kid. All the trees he'd climb, all the streams he swum, and all the ferocious animals he'd barely escaped from. Most of his retellings were highly exaggerated, but they loved this time with him more than anything else in the world. "Someday when you're older, I'll take you to all the secret places where I used to play," their father would tease them. He was a tall man with kind eyes that would wrinkle whenever he smiled, and he smiled quite a bit, especially when he was teasing the twins. At night, the twins' mother would help their grandmother cook dinner, and after they had eaten, as soon as the dishes were done, the family would sit around the fireplace. The grandmother would open her big storybook, and she and their father would take turns reading the twins' fairy tales until they fell asleep. Sometimes the Bailey family would be up until sunrise. They told the stories with such detail and passion that it didn't matter how many times the twins had heard the same story. They were the best memories any child could ask for. Unfortunately, the twins hadn't been back to their grandma's cottage in a very long time. "Mr. Bailey!" Mrs. Peters shouted. Connor had dozed off again. "Sorry, Mrs. Peters," he bellowed back, sitting straight up in his seat like a soldier on guard. If looks could kill, Connor would have been dead from the scowl she was sending him. "What did we think of the real Little Red Riding Hood?" the teacher asked her class. A girl with frizzy hair and thick braces raised her hand. "Mrs. Peters?" the frizzy-haired girl asked. "I'm confused." "And why is that?" Mrs. Peters said, as if asking, "What on earth could you possibly be confused about, idiot?" "Because it says, 'The big bad wolf is killed by the hunter,'" Frizzy Girl Hair explained. "I always thought the wolf was just upset because the other wolves in his pack made fun of his snout, and he and Little Red Riding Hood became friends in the end. At least that's what happened in the cartoon I used to watch when I was little." Mrs. Peters rolled her eyes so far in the back of her head that she could have seen what was behind her. "That," she said with a clenched jaw, "is exactly why we're having this lesson." The frizzy-haired girl became wide-eyed and sad. How could something so dear to her have been so wrong? "For homework," Mrs. Peters said, and the room unanimously slumped in their seats. "You are to pick your favorite fairy tale and write a paper, due tomorrow, on the real lesson the tale is trying to teach us." Mrs. Peters went to her desk, and the students began working on their assignment with little class time remaining. "Mr. Bailey," Mrs. Peters summoned Connor to her desk, "a word." Connor was in deep trouble, and he knew it. He cautiously stood up and walked to Mrs. Peters' desk. The other students gave him sorrowful looks as he walked by, as if he were walking to his executioner. "Yes, Mrs. Peters?" Connor asked. "Connor, I'm trying to be very sensitive about your family situation," Mrs. Peters said, glaring at him over the frames of her glasses. Family situation. 2 words Connor had heard too many times in the last year. "However," Mrs. Peters continued, "there is a certain behavior I will not tolerate in my class. You're constantly falling asleep in class. You don't pay attention, not to mention your quiz and test very poorly. Your sister seems to be functioning just fine. Perhaps you could follow her example." It was a comparison that felt like a kick in the stomach every time someone made it. Indeed, Connor was not his sister by any means. He was always punished because of it. "If this continues, I will be forced to have a meeting with your mother. Do you understand?" Mrs. Peters warned him. "Yes, sir. Ma'am. Sorry." It just hadn't been his best day. "Okay, then. You may have a seat." Connor slowly walked back to his seat, his head hanging slightly lower than it had all day. More than anything, he hated feeling like a failure. Alex had watched the entire conversation between her brother and their teacher. As much as her brother embarrassed her, she did feel for him, as only a sister could. Alex flipped through her literature book, deciding on which story to write about. The pictures weren't as colorful and exciting as they had been in her grandmother's book, but seeing all the characters she had grown up reading about made her feel at home, a feeling that had recently become a rarity. If only fairy tales were real, she thought, somebody could wave a wand and magically make things how they used to be. Okay, so that was chapter 1. This is the picture for chapter 2. The Longer Walk Home. So far, what do you guys think of the story? I'm gonna flip it like this. I'm loving this. You are? Which one, Mamash? What do you all think of the story so far? I think it's a pretty good story, honestly. Same. I feel for Connor. Little puppy bake. Boyish try. Anything else for you guys? This one's just chilling. Depending on how long it takes or how far we get in 2 hours, I'll do another stream. Maybe not tonight, but probably later on tomorrow or another day. I'll finish the rest of the story. So we'll see how far we can get through this in 2 hours, because currently we're at 40 minutes. So we'll see. Okay? I think so too. I really like it. That's good. I'm glad you all like it. I didn't know what book to read, but I was thinking, you know what? This book is pretty good. Pupper wants attention. Give them the pat for me. Alright. Okay, well. Look, those are scratches. 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 Yeah, scratches. Scratches. Yeah. And there's scratches. Those are from Cell. Scratches from Cell. There you go. Alright, Pupper got some scratches from Cell. She's just trying to chill right here. You good there? Alright. We'll go on to the next chapter. Chapter 2. Again, here's the picture. It's supposed to be the picture of their dad. The Longer Walk Home. I'm so excited about this lesson, Alex told Connor as they walked home from school. This was something Connor was used to hearing his sister declare, and it was usually his cue to stop listening. Mrs. Peters made a very good point, you know. Alex continued excitedly, speaking a mile a minute. Think about everything children miss out on when they're deprived of fairy tales. Oh, how terrible for them. Don't you just feel awful for them? Connor, are you listening to me? Yep, Connor lied. His attention was focused on an abandoned snail shell he was kicking along the sidewalk. Can you imagine a childhood without knowing all those characters and places? Alex continued. We're so fortunate that Dad and Grandma made such a point of reading them to us when we were little. Very lucky, Connor nodded, although he wasn't exactly sure what he was agreeing with. Every day after school, the Bailey twins would walk home together. They lived in a charming neighborhood that was surrounded by more charming neighborhoods that were surrounded by another series of charming neighborhoods. It was a sea of suburbia, where each house was similar to the next, but uniquely different at the same time. To pass the time as they walked, Alex would tell her brother everything on her mind, all her current thoughts and concerns, a summary of everything she had learned that day, and what she planned to do as soon as they got home. As much as this daily routine annoyed Connor, he knew he was the only person in the world Alex had to talk to, so he tried his best to listen. But listening had never been Connor's forte. How am I ever going to decide which story to write about? It's too difficult to choose, Alex said, clapping her hands with excitement. Which one are you going to write your paper on? Connor said, whipping his head up from looking at the ground. He had to mentally rewind the conversation to remember what the question was. The Boy Who Cried Wolf, he said, choosing the first fairy tale that came to mind. Can't choose that one, Alex said, shaking her head. That's the most obvious one. You have to select something more challenging to impress Mrs. Peters. You should pick something with a message hidden deeper inside it. One that isn't so on the surface, Connor sighed. It was always easier to just go along with what Alex said, instead of arguing with her, but sometimes it was unavoidable. Fine, I'll pick Sleeping Beauty, he decided. Interesting selection, Alex said, intrigued. What do you suppose the moral of the story is? Don't piss off your neighbors, I guess, Connor said. Alex grunted disapprovingly. Be serious, Connor. That is not the moral of Sleeping Beauty, she reprimanded. Sure it is, Connor explained. If the king and queen had just invited the crazy enchantress to their daughter's party in the first place, none of that stuff would have ever happened. That couldn't have stopped it from happening, said Alex. The enchantress was evil and probably would have cursed the baby princess anyway. Sleeping Beauty is about trying to prevent the unpreventable. Her parents tried protecting her and had all the spinning wheels in the kingdom destroyed. She was so sheltered, she didn't even know what the danger was, and she still pricked her finger on the first spindle she ever saw. Connor thought about this possibility and shook his head. He liked his version much better. I disagree, Connor told her. I've seen how upset you get when people don't invite you to places, and you usually look like you would curse a baby too. Alex gave Connor a dirty look Mrs. Peters would have been proud of. While there's no such thing as a wrong interpretation, I would have to say that is definitely a misread, Alex said. I'm just saying to be careful who you ignore, Connor clarified. I always thought Sleeping Beauty's parents had it coming. Oh? Alex questioned him. And I suppose you thought Hansel and Gretel had it coming too? Yes, Connor said, feeling clever, and so did the witch. How so? Alex asked. Because, Connor explained with a smirk on his face, if you're going to live in a house made of candy, don't move next door to a couple of obese kids. A lot of these fairy tale characters are missing common sense. Alex let out another disapproving grunt. Connor figured he could get at least 50 more out of her before they got home. The witch didn't live next door. She lived deep in the forest. They had to leave a trail of breadcrumbs behind so they could find their way back, remember? And the whole point of the house was to lure the kids in. They were starving, Alex reminded him. At least have all the facts straight before you criticize. If they were starving, what were they doing wasting breadcrumbs? Connor asked. Sounds like a couple of troublemakers to me. Alex grunted again. And in your deranged mind, what do you think the lesson of Goldilocks and the Three Bears is? Alex challenged him. Hold on. What are you doing? Don't go in there. Sorry. Okay. In your deranged mind, what do you think the lesson of Goldilocks and the Three Bears is? Alex challenged him. Easy, Connor said. Lock your doors. Robbers come in all shapes and sizes. Even curly-haired little girls can't be trusted. Alex grunted again and crossed her arms. She tried her best not to giggle. She didn't want to validate her brother's opinion. Goldilocks is about consequences. Mrs. Peters said so herself, Alex said. Although Alex would never admit sometimes arguing with her brother was amusing. What do you suppose Jack and the Beanstalk is about? She asked. Connor contemplated a moment and slightly grinned. Bad beans can cause more than indigestion, he answered, laughing hysterically to himself. Alex pursed her lips to hide a smile. What do you think the lesson of Little Red Riding Hood is? She asked him. Do you think she should have just mailed her grandmother the gift basket? Now you're thinking, he said. Although, I've always felt sorry for Little Riding Hood. It's obvious her parents didn't like her very much. Why do you say that? Alex asked, wondering how he could have possibly constructed that from the story. Who sends their young daughter into a dark and wolf-occupied forest carrying freshly baked food and wearing a bright jacket? Connor asked. They were practically asking for a wolf to eat her. She must have annoyed the heck out of them. Hey, MD. Currently reading. I will ask you in a bit how you're doing. She must have annoyed the heck out of them. Alex held back laughter with all her might, but to Connor's delight, she let a quiet chuckle slip. I know you secretly agree with me, Connor said, bumping her shoulder with his. Connor, it's people like you who ruin fairy tales for the rest of the world, Alex said, forcing the smile on her face to fade. People make jokes about them, and suddenly the whole message is lost. Alex suddenly stopped walking. All the color in her face slowly drained away. Something across the street had caught her eye. Something very disappointing. What's the matter? Connor asked, turning back to her. Alex was staring at a large house. It was a lovely home, painted blue with white trim, had several windows. The front yard was landscaped to perfection. It had just the right amount of grass, patches of colorful flowers, and a large oak tree ideal for climbing. If a house could smile, this house would be grinning from ear to ear. "Look," Alex said, pointing to a for sale sign next to the oak tree. A bright red strip on the word "sold" had recently been added to it. "It's sold," Alex said, slowly shaking her head from side to side in disbelief. "It's sold," she repeated, not wanting it to be true. The little color in Connor's round face drained too. The twins stared at the house for a moment in silence, each not knowing what to say to the other. "We both knew it would happen eventually," Connor said. "Then why do I feel so surprised?" Alex asked softly. "I guess it had been for sale for so long. I figured it was just, waiting for us." Connor saw tears begin to form in his sister's eyes, through the tears forming in his own. "Come on, Alex," Connor said, and kept walking. "Let's go home." She looked at the house for a second more and then followed him. The house was only one thing the Bailey family had recently lost. A year ago, just a few days before their 11th birthday, Alex and Connor's father died in a car accident on his way home from work. Mr. Bailey had owned a bookstore a few streets away named Bailey's Books, but all it had taken was a few small streets for a big accident to happen. The twins and their mother had been anxiously waiting for him at the dinner table when they got the phone call telling them that their father wouldn't be joining them that night or any night after that. He had never been late to dinner before, so as soon as the telephone rang, they all knew something was wrong. Alex and Connor could never forget the look on their mother's face when she answered the phone, a look that told them, without saying a word, that their lives would never be the same. They had never seen their mother cry like she did that night. Everything happened so fast after that. It was hard for the twins to remember what order it all happened in. They remembered their mother making tons of phone calls, having to deal with a lot of paperwork. They remembered that their grandmother came to take care of them while their mother made all the funeral arrangements. They remember holding their mother's hands as they walked down the church aisle at the funeral. They remember the white flowers and candles and all the sad expressions on everyone's faces as they passed. They remembered all the food people sent. They remembered how sorry people told them they were. They didn't remember their 11th birthday, because no one did. The twins remembered how strong Grandma and Mom had stayed for them in the following months. They remembered their mother explaining to them why they had to sell the bookstore. They remembered that eventually their mother couldn't afford their beautiful blue house anymore, and they had to move into a rental house a little way down the street. They remembered Grandma leaving them once they were settled into the new, smaller house. They remembered returning to school and how falsely normal everything appeared to be. But most of all, the twins remembered not understanding why any of it happened. A full year had passed, and the twins still didn't understand it. People had told them it would get easier with time. But how much time were they talking about? The loss seemed to grow deeper each day without their dad. They missed him so much, sometimes, that they expected their sadness to swell out of their bodies. They missed his smile, they missed his laugh, they missed his stories. Whenever Alex had a particularly bad day at school, the first thing she would do when she got home was jump on her bike and pedal to her dad's store. She would run through the front doors, find her dad, and say, "Daddy, I need to talk to you." It didn't matter if he was helping a customer or putting brand new books on the shelves. Mr. Bailey would always stop what he was doing, take his daughter to the storage room in the back, and listen to what had happened. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" he would ask with big, concerned eyes. "I had a really bad day today, Daddy," Alex said on one occasion. "All the other kids still teasing you?" "I can call the school and ask your teacher to have a talk with them." "That wouldn't solve anything," Alex said through sniffles. "By publicly persecuting me, they're filing an insecure void caused by social and domestic neglect." Mr. Bailey scratched his head. "So what you're saying, sweetheart, is that they're just jealous?" he asked her. "Exactly," Alex said. "I read a psychology book in the library today at lunch that explained it." Mr. Bailey let out a proud laugh. His daughter's intelligence constantly amazed him. "I think you're just too bright for your own good, Alex," he said. "Sometimes I wish I was like everyone else," Alex confessed. "I'm tired of being lonely, Daddy. If being smart and being a good student means that I'll never have friends, then I wish I was more like Connor." "Alex, have I told you the story about the curvy tree?" Mr. Bailey asked. "No," Alex answered. Mr. Bailey's eyes lit up. They always did when he was about to tell a story. "Well," he started, "one day when I was very young, I was walking around the woods and saw something very peculiar. It was an evergreen tree, but it was different from any other evergreen tree I'd ever seen. Instead of growing straight out of the ground, its trunk curved and wound in circles like a large vine." "How?" Alex asked, utterly entranced. "This is impossible. Evergreens don't grow like that." "Hey, Kazu." "Perhaps someone forgot to tell that to the tree," Mr. Bailey said. "Anyway, one day the loggers came and cut down every single tree in the area except for the curvy tree." "Why?" Alex asked. "Because they figured it was unusable," Mr. Bailey answered. "You can never make a table, or a chair, or a cabinet out of it. You see, the curvy tree may have felt different from the other trees, but its uniqueness is what saved it." "Whatever happened to the curvy tree?" Alex said. "It's still there today," Mr. Bailey said with a smile. "It's growing taller and taller and curvier every day." A tiny smile grew on Alex's face. "I think I get what you're trying to tell me, Daddy," she said. "I'm glad," said Mr. Bailey. "Now all you have to do is wait for the loggers to come, chop down all your pears." Alex laughed for the first time all day. Mr. Bailey always knew how to cheer her up. It took the twins twice as long to walk home since they moved into the rental house. It was a boring home, with brown walls and a flat roof. Windows were few, and the front yard consisted of only a plain grass lawn that was barely alive because the sprinklers didn't work. The Bailey's home was cozy, but cluttered. They had more furniture than they had room for, and none of it matched the house, because it was never intended to. Even though they had lived there for more than half a year, unpacked boxes were still lined up against the walls. None of them wanted to unpack them. None of them wanted to admit they were staying as long as they actually were. The twins immediately went upstairs and into their separate bedrooms. Alex sat at her desk and started her homework. Connor laid on his bed and started a nap. Alex's bedroom could have been mistaken for a library if it weren't for the bright yellow bed tucked away in the corner. Bookshelves of all heights and widths lined the room, holding everything from chapter books to encyclopedias. Connor's bedroom was more like a cave, in which he appropriately hibernated whenever he could. It was dark and messy. Patches of carpet could barely be seen in between piles of dirty clothes. A half-eaten grilled cheese sandwich rested on the floor, and had been there for too long for anyone's peace of mind. An hour or so later, the twins heard the sounds meant their mother was visiting from work, and they went downstairs to join her in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table while on her phone, flipping through the stack of envelopes she had just collected from the mailbox. Charlotte Bailey was a very pretty woman with red hair and freckled skin that the twins undoubtedly had inherited from her. She had a huge, caring heart and loved her kids more than anything else in the world. Unfortunately, they hardly ever saw their mother anymore. She was a nurse at the local children's hospital and was forced to work constant double shifts to support the family since her husband passed away. Mrs. Bailey was already gone before the twins woke up every morning and would get home after the twins had gone to sleep. The only time she had with the twins anymore was on a brief lunch and dinner break she spent at home. Mrs. Bailey loved her job and loved taking care of children at the hospital, but hated that it took time away from her own. In the way, the twins felt that they had lost both their parents after their dad's death. "Hi, guys," Mrs. Bailey said to the twins, covering the receiving end of the phone. "Did you have a good day at school?" Alex nodded positively. Connor gave her an overly enthusiastic thumbs up. "Yes, I can work a double this Monday," she said to the phone, speaking with someone from the hospital. "No problem," she lied. Most of the envelopes she was looking through had bright red warning stickers, final notice, or payment due. Even working the hours she worked, Mrs. Bailey had to get creative with money sometimes. She put the envelopes facing down on the table, hiding them from the twins. "Thank you," Mrs. Bailey said into the phone and clicked it off. She turned to her children. "How are you guys?" "Good," they both said passively. Mrs. Bailey's mom tuition turned on. She knew something was troubling them. "What's the matter?" she asked, studying their faces. "You seem a little down." Alex and Connor looked to each other, unsure of what to say. Did their mother know about their old house? Should they tell her? "Come on," their mother said. "What is it? You can tell me anything." "We aren't upset," Connor said. "We knew it was going to happen eventually." "What?" Mrs. Bailey asked. "The house sold," Alex said. "We saw it today on our way home from school." There was a moment before anyone said anything. This wasn't news to Mrs. Bailey, but the twins could tell she was just as disappointed about it as they were. Had hoped they wouldn't notice it. "Oh, that," Mrs. Bailey said, brushing it off. Yes, I know. You shouldn't be sad about it, though. We'll find a bigger and better house as soon as we catch up on things here. And that was that. Mrs. Bailey wasn't a good liar. And neither were the twins. Still, Alex and Connor always smiled and nodded along with her. What did you learn in school today? Their mother asked. So much, Alex proclaimed with a huge smile. Not much, Connor mumbled with a scowl. That's because you fell asleep in class again, Alex tattled. Connor gave Alex a dirty look. Oh, Connor, not again, Miss Bailey said, shaking her head. What are we going to do with you? It's not my fault, Connor said. Mrs. Peters' lessons put me to sleep. It just happens. It's like my brain switches off or something. Sometimes even my old rubber band trick doesn't work. Rubber band trick? Mrs. Bailey asked. I wear a rubber band around my wrist and snap it every time I get sleepy, Connor explained. And I was positive it was foolproof. Mrs. Bailey shook her head, more amused than anything. Well, don't forget how lucky you are to be in that classroom, Mrs. Bailey said it with a guilt-inducing mom look. All the kids at the hospital would like nothing more than to trade places with you and go to school every day. They'd change their minds if they met Mrs. Peters, Connor said under his breath. The phone rang just as Miss Bailey was about to continue scolding her son. Hello? Miss Bailey said, answering the phone. The worry lines on her forehead became very prominent. Tomorrow? No, there must be a mistake. I told them I couldn't work at all. It's the twins' 12th birthday, and I was planning on spending the evening with them. Alex and Connor looked at each other with the same surprised expression. They'd almost forgot they were turning 12 the next day. Almost. Are you positive there's no one else who can cover it? Mrs. Bailey asked, her voice more desperate than she wanted it to sound. No. I understand. Yes, of course. I'm aware of the staff cuts. See you tomorrow. Miss Bailey hung up the phone, closed her eyes, and let out a deep, disappointed sigh. Got some bad news, guys, she told them. It looks like I have to work tomorrow night, so I won't be here for your birthday. But I'll make it up to you. We'll celebrate when I get home from work that night, all right? That's fine, Mom, Alex said cheerfully, trying to make her feel better. We understand. It's okay, Connor added. We weren't really expecting anything special anyway. The situation made Mrs. Bailey feel like the worst mother in the world, and their understanding made her feel even worse. She would have much rather watched them throw a fit or get angry or show any emotion appropriate for their age. They were too young to be used to the disappointment. Oh, Mrs. Bailey said, fighting back the sadness inside her. Great, then we'll have dinner and get a cake and have a nice night. I'm going to go upstairs for a minute before I head back to work. She left the kitchen, hurried upstairs, and into her bedroom. The twins waited a beat before climbing up the stairs to check on her. They peered into their mother's room. She was sitting on her bed crying, with rolled-up balls of tissue in both hands, talking to a framed photo of her late husband. Oh, John, Mrs. Bailey said, I try to stay strong and keep our family going, but it's really hard to do this without you. They're such good kids. They don't deserve this. She quickly dried her tears when she felt the twins watching her. Alex and Connor slowly walked into the room and sat on either side of her. I'm so sorry for everything, Mrs. Bailey said to them. It just isn't fair that you have to go through all of this at such a young age. It's going to be okay, Mom, Alex said. We don't need anything special for our birthday. Birthdays are overrated anyway, Connor added. We know things are tight right now. Mrs. Bailey put her arms around them. When did you two become so grown up? She asked them with watery eyes. I am the luckiest mom in all the world. All their eyes fell on the photo of Mr. Bailey. You know what your dad would say if you were here? Mrs. Bailey asked the twins. He'd say, right now we're living in an ugly chapter of our lives, but books always get better. The twins smiled at her, hoping this was true. All right. So that was chapter 2. So what did you guys think of that one? How do you guys like this so far? How do you feel about the story? Such a big fan. Aw, I'm captivated. You're captivated by the story? That's good. She's all excited. She's like, Mom, you stopped reading. I must come ask for cuddles. Get your little cuddles, Mamash. Get your little cuddles. Puppy, Yes, this is my pupper. This is the one who watches all of your streams, guys. This is her. This is Selena. She loves watching TV and streams. My chiquita. Hey, mama. I'm neutral, but that's because I'm working on stuff with this as background, so not absorbing much story. No worries. That was a good chapter. I like it. That's good. It's a whole puppy. Yes. This is a whole pupper. Thanks for watching my stream, pupper. It looks like she's nodding. She's saying you're welcome. You're so cute. You're so cute. You're so cute. You're very cute. Okay, so I assume you guys like the story currently as it's going. We're already gonna go to chapter 3. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. 7 out of 10. Again, if you're gonna want to read it like later on by yourself or anything like that, this is the name of the book, Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell. This is the author, Chris Colfer. Please stop scratching me, baby. This is the next 2 books. It's The Land of the Stories, The Enchantress Returns, and then The Land of the Stories, A Grim Warning. If you all want to check out the books later or anything like that, either check them out, see them, you know, anything, read them, anything like that. And for anyone who does remember, Chris Colfer is the guy who plays Kurt in Glee. Come on, mush. Come on, mush. Go lay down, Mama. Go lay down. I'm drinking water so I don't dehydrate myself. Okay. So we'll continue on with chapter 3, A Birthday Surprise. It's a New York Times bestseller, and it's a New York Times bestseller. Well, this is the paperback, so it's gonna be a little bit cheaper, especially since this is I didn't get it when it was new. If I had gotten it when it was new, it would probably be like $24. But because I got it later on, it's $8. Yeah. So this is chapter 3, Birthday Surprise. It's the cake and some presents. A little fun for them. You know, they're turning 12. Okay. Pencils down, Mrs. Peters ordered from the front of the classroom. Her students were taking a math test, and she had been watching them like a prison guard for the entire time. Pass your test to the front. Connor looked down at the test as if it were written in ancient hieroglyphics. Most of his answers were blank, and he had just scribbled around the others to make it look like he had tried. He said a little prayer to himself and passed the test forward with the others. The tests were all passed to Alex, who stacked them in a neat pile for Mrs. Peters. She always felt so refreshed after taking a test, especially one as simple as that one had been for her. Her brother's test caught her eye since it was the one with the least amount of writing on it. Alex knew Connor always tried his best at school, but his best never seemed to be good enough. She looked back at him, wishing she could help him, and then it occurred to her, maybe she could. Alex looked up at Mrs. Peters and saw that she was busy, looking at the notes in her lesson plan. Would her teacher notice if Alex quickly filled in a couple answers for her brother? Was Alex even capable of doing something so blatantly wrong? Was it considered cheating if you were doing it on someone else's test? Would the gracious gesture cancel out the offense in the grand scheme of things? Alex was prone to overthinking everything, so she just did it. She quickly filled in some of her brother's answers, making her handwriting slightly sloppier than usual, handed the stack of tests to Mrs. Peters. It was the most spontaneous things she had ever done. Thank you, Miss Bailey, Mrs. Peters said, making eye contact with her. Alex felt like a pit of her stomach had fallen out of her body. The excitement she had felt from her impulse was now overshadowed by guilt. Mrs. Peters had always trusted her. How could she do something so juvenile? Should she confess what she had done? What was the punishment for her crime? Would she feel this guilty for the rest of her life? She looked back at her brother. Connor let out a long but quiet sigh, and Alex sensed her brother's sadness and embarrassment. She could feel his hopelessness as if it were her own. The critical wheels in Alex's head stopped turning. She knew she had done the right thing, not as a student, but as a sister. I want you all to get out your homework from last night, Miss Peters commanded, and I would like you to briefly present your work in front of the class. The teacher regularly surprised the class with impromptu presentations to keep them on their toes. She took a seat on the stool in the back of the room, uncomfortably close to Connor's seat, so she could keep an eye on his consciousness. One by one, the students presented their assignments to the class. Besides a boy who thought Jack and the Beanstalk was about an alien abduction, and the girl who claimed Puss in Boots was an early example of animal cruelty, all the students seemed to have interpreted the tales correctly. It's so hard to choose just one fairy tale to write about, Alex said as she animatedly presented her 7-page paper to the class. So I selected the story, the theme of which is present in virtually every fairy tale and every story never written. Cinderella. Her excitement was not shared by her peers. Many people have issues with Cinderella, saying it has anti-feminist elements, Alex continued, but I think that's completely ridiculous. Cinderella is not about a man saving a woman, it's about karma. Most of the class began daydreaming about other things. Miss Peters was the only person in the room who seemed even slightly interested in what Alex had to say. Think about it, Alex went on. Even after years of constant abuse from her stepmother and stepsisters, Cinderella remained a good person with high hopes. She never stopped believing in herself and in the good of the world. And although she married the prince in the end, Cinderella always had inner happiness. Her story shows that even in the worst of situations, even when it seems no one in the world appreciates you, as long as you have hope, everything can get better. Alex let her mind linger on what she had said. She questioned the last point she'd made in her presentation. Was that really what Cinderella was about, or was that what she needed Cinderella to be about? Thank you, Miss Bailey. Very well said, Mrs. Peters said with the closest thing to a smile her face was capable of making. Thank you for your time, Alex said and nodded to the class. It's your turn, Mr. Bailey. She was sitting so close to him that he could feel the warm breath from her nostrils on the back of his neck. Connor went to the front of the classroom, dragging his feet as if they were encased in concrete. He had never had trouble talking in front of class, but he'd rather be anywhere in the world than presenting something in front of a teacher. Alex gave him an encouraging nod. I chose The Boy Who Cried Wolf, Connor said, going against his sister's advice from the day before. Alex slumped in her seat. Mrs. Peters rolled her eyes. This was very disappointing. I know you're all thinking I went with the easiest one, Connor said, except, reading it again, I don't think the story is about the importance of honesty. I think it's about high expectations. Alex and Mrs. Peters both raised an eyebrow. Where was he going with this? Sure. The boy was a brat. I can't deny that. Connor continued, gesturing to the half-page paper he had written. But can you blame him for having a little fun? Clearly, his village was having a bit of a wolf problem, and everyone was stressed out about it. He was just a kid. Did they really expect him to be perfect all the time? His presentation may not have been the best, but it certainly was catching the class's attention. And it makes me wonder, why was no one watching this kid? Connor added. Maybe if his parents had kept an eye on him, he wouldn't have been eaten. I think the story is trying to tell us to keep an eye on our kids, especially if they're pathological liars. Thank you. Connor never tried to be funny. He was just painfully honest about his thoughts and opinions. This honesty always amused his classmates, but never his teacher. Thank you, Mr. Bailey, Mrs. Peters said sharply. You may sit down now. Connor knew he'd blown it. He took a seat, resuming his position under his teacher's cold stare and warm breath. Why did he even bother trying anymore? It wasn't the end of a school day unless Connor left feeling completely worthless. There was only one person who was capable of making him feel better when he felt this way. Connor only wished he was still around. Mr. Bailey always knew when his son needed to talk to him. It didn't have anything to do with the observation or intuition, but with location. Occasionally, Mr. Bailey would get home from work and find his son sitting up in the oak tree in the front yard, with a contemplative look on his face. Connor, Mr. Bailey would ask, approaching the tree, is everything okay, bud? Uh-huh, Connor would mumble. Are you sure? Mr. Bailey would ask. Yep, Connor would say unconvincingly. He wasn't as vocal about his troubles as his sister was. but you could see it in his face. Mr. Bailey would climb up the tree and have a seat on the branch next to his son and coax out what was troubling him. "Are you sure you don't want to talk about it?" Mr. Bailey would continue. "Did something happen at school today?" Connor would nod his head. "Got a bad grade on a test," he admitted on one occasion. "Did you study for it?" his father asked. "Yes," Connor said. "I studied really hard, Dad. But it's just no use. I'll never be as smart as Alex." His cheeks turned bright red with embarrassment. "Connor, let me fill you in on something that took me a long time to learn," Mr. Bailey said. "The women in your life are always going to seem smarter. It's just the way it is. I've been married to your mother for 13 years, and I still have trouble keeping up with her. You can't compare yourself to others." "But I'm stupid, Dad," Connor said, his eyes filling with tears. "I find that hard to believe," Mr. Bailey said. "It takes intelligence to be funny and tell a good joke, and you're the funniest kid I know." "Humor doesn't help with history or math," Connor said. "Doesn't matter how hard I try in school. I'm always going to be the dumb kid in class." Connor's face went white and expressionless. He stared off into nothing, so ashamed of himself that it hurt. Luckily for him, Mr. Bailey had an encouraging story for every situation. "Connor, have I ever told you about the legend of the walking fish?" Mr. Bailey asked. He looked up at his father. "The walking fish?" Connor asked. "Dad, no offense, but I don't think one of your stories is going to make me feel better this time." "All right. Suit yourself," Mr. Bailey said. A few moments passed and Connor's curiosity got the best of him. "Okay, you can tell me about the walking fish," Connor said. Mr. Bailey's eyes lit up as they always did just before he was about to tell a story. Connor could tell this was going to be a good one. "Once upon a time, there was a large fish who lived in a lake by himself," Mr. Bailey told him. "Every day the fish would watch longingly as a boy from the village nearby would play with all the horses and dogs and squirrels on land." "Is the dog going to die in the story, Dad?" Connor interrupted. "You know I hate stories when dogs die." "Let me finish," Mr. Bailey went on. "One day, a fairy came to the lake and granted the fish a wish." "That's random," Connor said. "Why do fairies always just show up and do nice things for people they don't know?" "Employment obligation?" Mr. Bailey shrugged. "But for argument's sake, let's say she dropped her wand in the lake and the fish retrieved it. So she offered him a wish as a thank you. Happy?" "That's better," Connor said. "Go on." "The fish predictably wished for legs, so he could play with the boy from the village," Mr. Bailey said. "So the fairy turned his fins into legs, and he became the walking fish." "That's weird. Let me guess. The fish was so freaky looking the boy never wanted to play with him." "Nope. They became great friends and played together with the other land animals," Mr. Bailey told him. "But one day, the boy fell into the lake and couldn't swim. The walking fish tried to save him, but it was no use. He didn't have fins anymore. Sadly, the boy drowned." Connor's mouth hung open like a broken glove compartment. "You see, if the fish had just stayed in the lake and not wished to be something else, he could have saved the boy's life," Mr. Bailey finished. "Dad, that's a horrible story," he said. "How does a boy live by a lake and not know how to swim? Dogs can swim. Couldn't one of them have saved him? Where was the fairy when the boy was drowning?" "I think you're missing the point of the story," Mr. Bailey said. "Sometimes we forget about our own advantages because we focus on what we don't have. Just because you have to work a little harder at something that seems easier to others doesn't mean you're without your own talents." Connor thought about this for a moment. "I think I get it, Dad," he said. Mr. Bailey smiled at him. "Now why don't we get down from this tree, and I'll help you study for your next test." "I told you, studying doesn't help," Connor said. "I've tried and tried and tried. It never helps." "Then we'll come up with our own way of studying," Mr. Bailey told him. "We'll look at pictures of people in your history book and make up jokes about them so you'll remember their names. And we'll create funny scenarios to help you with all those math formulas." Connor slowly but surely nodded and agreed to it. "Fine," he said with a half smile. "But for future reference, I liked your story about the curvy tree much better." The walk home that day was quiet. Alex could sense her brother's presentation had left him a little tense. She tried breaking the silence every few steps with a supportive comment, or at least she thought they were supportive. "I thought you made a good point," she said sweetly. "Granted, it's not a point I would have ever made." "Thanks," Connor replied. She wasn't helping. "You may have overanalyzed it, though," Alex said. "I do it all the time. Sometimes I read a story and interpret it the way I want to, rather than the way the author wanted me to. It's just practice." He didn't respond. She still wasn't helping. "Well, it's our birthday today," Alex reminded him. "Are you excited to be 12? Not really, Connor admitted. It feels just like 11. But aren't we supposed to be getting a new set of molars soon? Come on, let's be positive, Alex said. Even though we aren't doing anything exciting for our birthday, we should stay optimistic. There are plenty of things to look forward to. One more year until we're teenagers, I suppose, Connor said. Only 4 more years left until we can drive. And 6 years left until we can vote and go to college, Alex added. That was all they could come up with. Their cheerfulness was hollow, and they both knew it, so they just stayed silent for the remainder of the walk. Even if they had the most extravagant party in the world waiting for them at home, birthdays were always going to be hard for them. School had been predictable. The walk home had been typical. The whole day had seemed normal. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary to make their birthday feel special at all, till they got home and saw a bright blue car pull into their driveway. "Grandma?" the twins said in perfect unison. "Surprise!" yelled their grandmother, getting out of her car. She was so loud the entire neighborhood could hear her. The twins ran up to her with huge smiles on their faces. They only saw their grandma a couple times a year, and were stunned to see her in their driveway with no prior warning. Their grandmother hugged both of them so tight they thought they'd pop. "Look at you two. You both look like you've grown a foot since the last time I saw you." Their grandmother was a petite woman with long, graying brown hair that was pulled back in a tight braid. She had the warmest smile and the kindest eyes in the world, which wrinkled pleasantly when she smiled, just like the twins' dad's eyes had. She was cheerful and energetic, and exactly what the twins needed. She always wore bright dresses and her signature shoes, with white laces and brown heels. She was never more than a few feet away from her large green travel bag and blue purse. And although their grandfather had died many years before, she always wore her wedding ring. "We had no idea you were coming," Connor said. "It wouldn't be a surprise if you knew I was coming," Grandma said. "What are you doing here, Grandma?" Alex asked. "Your mom called and asked me to stay with you while she went to work," Grandma told them. "I couldn't let you spend your birthday alone, could I? Thank goodness I was in the country." Their grandma was retired and spent most of the year traveling around the world with their other retired friends. They traveled to mostly third world countries and read to 6 children in hospitals and taught other children of the communities to read and write. "Come help me with the groceries," Grandma told the twins. She opened her trunk and the twins began unloading the bags and bags filled with food into the house. It was enough food to last them for weeks. Mrs. Bailey was sitting at the kitchen table going through another stack of mail with bright red warning labels on them. She quickly pushed them to the side when the twins and their grandmother paraded into the kitchen with groceries. "What's all this?" Mrs. Bailey asked. "Hello, dear," Grandma said to her. "I'm planning on cooking the twins a huge birthday dinner and I wasn't sure what you had in the house, so I went to the store and picked up a couple things." Their grandmother always had a talent for sugarcoating the truth. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," Mrs. Bailey said, shaking her head, unprepared for the kind gesture. "It wasn't any trouble at all," Grandma said with a small but reassuring smile. "Alex, Connor, how about you go get your birthday presents from the front seat of my car, and I'll catch up with your mom for a second. But don't open them until tonight." They happily did as she asked. Presents was a word that had been absent from their vocabulary for a long time. "See, I told you," Alex said to Connor on their way to their grandma's car. "Optimism always pays off." Yeah, Connor said. Half a dozen wrapped presents with bright bows, each marked to one of them, were waiting in the front seat of the car. The twins returned inside with their gifts. Their grandmother and mother were still having a conversation, and they most likely weren't supposed to hear. "Things are still tough," Mrs. Bailey said. "Even after selling the bookstore, the house foreclosed, and we still have some debt and things unpaid from the funeral. But we're making it somehow. In a few more months, we'll be back on our feet." Grandma took Mrs. Bailey's hands into her own. "If you need anything, dear, and I mean anything, you know where to find me," she said. "You've already helped so much," Mrs. Bailey told her. "I don't know where we'd be now if it weren't for you. I could never ask you for anything else." "You're not asking, I'm offering," Grandma assured. The twins knew if they were eavesdropping any longer, they'd be caught, so they walked back into the kitchen with their presents. "Well, I have to go back to work," Mrs. Bailey said, and kissed both of the twins on the top of their heads. "Have a great night, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Save some celebration for me." She gathered her things and mouthed a meaningful thank you to their grandmother on the way out. Grandma put her things away in the guest bedroom and returned to the kitchen where she found the stack of bills Mrs. Bailey had put aside. She plopped the mail into her own purse with a smile, and that was that. Grandma loved helping people, especially if it was against their will. "Let's get started on dinner, shall we?" Grandma said, clapping her hands. Alex and Connor sat at the table, visited with their grandmother while she cooked up a storm. She told them all about her recent trips, the difficulties she and her friends experienced getting into and out of places, and all the interesting people she had met along the way. "I've never met a person I didn't learn something from," Grandma said. "Even the most monotonous person will surprise you. Remember that." She was cooking so many different things, it was impossible to tell which ingredient was going where. Everything she did was so fast, and she used almost every pan and dish they had. With every second that passed, the twins' stomachs growled louder and louder, and their mouths salivated more and more. Finally, after a few hours of aroma-teasing torture, they ate. Alex and Connor had become accustomed to frozen dinners and takeout. They had forgotten how good food could taste. There were plates of mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese, oven-roasted chicken with carrots and peas, and freshly baked rolls. Their kitchen table looked like the cover of a cookbook. Just when they thought they couldn't possibly eat any more, their grandmother pulled out a huge birthday cake out of the oven. Twins were amazed. They hadn't even realized she had been baking one. She sang "Happy Birthday" to the twins, and the twins blew out the candles. "Now open your presents," Grandma said. "I've been collecting for you all year." They opened their boxes and were flooded with knickknacks from all the countries their grandmother had been to. Alex was given a copy of her favorite books in other languages: Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in French, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz in German, Little Woman in Dutch. Connor got a pile of candies and tacky t-shirts that said things like, "My crazy grandma traveled to India, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt." They both received several figurines of famous structures like the Eiffel Tower and the Leaning Tower of Pisa and the Taj Mahal. "It's crazy to think that places like these actually exist in the world," Alex said, holding an Eiffel Tower in her hand. "You would be amazed to know what's out there, just waiting to be discovered," their grandma said with a smile and a twinkle in her eye. The day, with very low expectations, had turned into one of the best birthdays they ever had. As the night grew later, the visit with their grandmother had began to come to a bittersweet end. Since their dad had died, they never saw their grandma for more than a day at a time, and there were always a few months between each visit. She was always so busy with her travels. "When do you leave?" Alex asked her grandmother. "Tomorrow," she said, "as soon as I take you to school." The twins' posture sank a bit. "What's the matter?" their grandmother asked, sensing their spirits sink. "We just wish you could stay longer, Grandma. That's all," Connor said. "We really miss you when you're gone. Things are so gloomy here without Dad, but you make everything seem like it's going to be okay." Their grandmother's constant smile faded slightly, and her gaze drifted off to the window. She stared blankly into the night sky and took a deep breath. "Oh, kiddos, if I could spend every day with you, I would," Grandma said longingly, perhaps more disheartened than she intended to show. "But sometimes life hands us some certain responsibilities, not because we want them, but because we are meant to have them. It's our duty to see to them. All I can ever think about is how much I miss you two and your dad when I'm away." It was hard for Alex and Connor to understand. Did she not want to travel as much as she did? Their grandma looked back at them. Her eyes were bright with a new idea. "I almost forgot. I have one more gift for you," Grandma said, and jumped up and skipped into the next room. She returned carrying a large old book with a dark emerald cover titled The Land of Stories in gold writing. Alex and Connor knew what the book was as soon as they saw it. If their childhood could be symbolized by an object, it was this book. "It's your old storybook," Alex proclaimed. "I haven't seen that in years." Their grandmother nodded. "It's very old and has been with our family for a very long time," Grandma told them. "I take it with me everywhere I go and read it to the children in other countries. But now, I want you two to have it." The twins were shocked by the gesture. "What?" Connor asked. "We can't take your book." "Grandma, that's the Land of Stories. It's your book. It's always been so important to you." Their grandmother opened the book and flipped through the pages, the entire room filled with its musty paper aroma. "That's very true," said Grandma. "This book and I have spent a lot of time together over the years, but the best times were when I read it to you. So, I'd like to pass it down to you now. I don't need it anymore. I have all the stories memorized anyway." She handed it to them. Alex hesitated, but finally accepted the book from her grandmother. Didn't feel right to take it. It was like receiving an heirloom from a relative who is still alive. Whenever you're feeling down, on the days you miss your dad the most, or when you just wish I were here, all you have to do is open it up and we'll all be together in spirit, reading along, Grandma told them. "Now it's getting late and you have school tomorrow. Let's get ready for bed." They did as she asked, even though they were too old for it. Their grandmother insisted on tucking them into their beds like old times. Alex took The Land of Stories with her to bed that night. She gently flipped through the old pages, being careful not to tear them. Seeing all the colorful illustrations of the places and characters again made her feel like she was reading an old scrapbook of sorts. She loved spending time reading about fairy tale characters more than anything. They had always felt so real and accessible to her. They were the best friends she had ever had. I wish we got to choose which world we lived in, Alex said, running her fingers over the illustrations. They were so inviting. In her hands was a world unlike the one she lived in. It was a world unaltered by political corruption or technology, a world where good things came to good people, and a world she wanted to be a part of with all her being. Alex imagined what it'd be like to be a character in her own fairy tale, the forest she'd run through, the castles she'd live in, and the creatures she'd befriend. Eventually, Alex's eyelids began to feel heavy. She closed The Land of Stories, placed it on her nightstand, clicked off her lamp, and began to drift off to sleep. She was just about to fade into unconsciousness when she heard a funny noise. A low humming sound filled her room. What in the world? Alex said to herself, opened her eyes to see what it was. She saw nothing. That's strange. She closed her eyes once more and began to drift back to sleep. The humming noise began to buzz through the room again. Alex sat up and looked around her room and finally found what was making the noise. It was coming from inside The Land of Stories on her nightstand, and to her amazement, the pages were unmistakably glowing. Alright, so that is chapter 3, The Birthday Surprise. What did you all think of that one? What did you find interesting, not interesting, different? I'm obsessed. I am glad you are obsessed. It's a very good book. I have all 3 of them. So, I don't get why Grandma has to travel all the time. I'm ready to be teleported by the book. I love the grandma. Like, she obviously had money to help out. Well, I will not spoil anything, but eventually we'll find out why she has to travel so much. The grandma reminds me of the grandma from the Halloween Town, right? She seems similar. Puppy break. Watch Alec go into the book first. Hi. Hi, Mamash. Hi. Hi. Kitty. Kitty patootie. Kitty patootie. She just wants cuddles. That's all she wants. Alright, what's you all's prediction for the next chapter? For chapter 4. What's you all's prediction? This is the title of it. Chapter 4. Land of Stories. We're teleporting into the book. I miss having dogs around. You can see my dog. I don't know if you were here earlier, Ranger, but I explained that she's the one who watches all you guys' streams. I predict they teleport to the mystical land and find Grandma lives there. Okay. I am down for teleporting into the book. Okay, so everyone believes they're going to teleport into the book, and Ranger believes that... Okay, so you think only Alex is going in the book. Okay. And Ranger believes that they're going to find Grandma lives in the book, technically. Okay. I'm just doubling down on Grandma's Halloween Town vibes. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Grandma was the one to reveal to Marnie that she was a witch. So, you never know. just making sure I get hydrated enough for this. Can I help you? Yes, you're cute. Yes, I know you're very cute. Love you. Love you. The grandma is a pirate queen who travels about writing these stories and helping people. I love that. A pirate queen. That's interesting. Okay, that's an interesting take. Now, mind you, this I have read. I have read all of this and the whole series, so I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm not going to tell you, but I know what's going to happen. Which is why I want to hear your predictions. It's funny. I find it interesting to see what people are thinking that's going to happen. Very adorable. You're so cute, Mamash. Can you stop biting me, though? I would love if you could stop biting me. Because that hurts. We'll see if we'll either go through one more or two more chapters. And then we'll stop there. Okay? Because this is a pretty big book. So we'll see. It's funny. Those fools have no clue how intense this is about to get. Basically, that's that. I mean, not those fools, but you all don't really know how intense this is, actually. Okay. Can you stop scratching me for a second? Yeah? No? Please? Stop. Okay, thank you. Chapter 4. Land of Stories. Magical book. An owl. I don't know if it's protruding for the book or not. Alex had been acting strange all week. Connor had noticed right away, because she wasn't as talkative and upbeat as she usually was. Instead, she was very quiet and looked like she was in a deep state of confusion. When they ate breakfast, she barely acknowledged it when her brother said, "Good morning." During school, she stopped raising her hand as much. After school, she barely said a word to Connor while they walked home. And as soon as they got home, Alex would run up the stairs and lock herself in her bedroom for the rest of the day. "Are you feeling okay?" Connor eventually asked her. "You seem different." "Yes, I'm just tired," Alex said. Connor knew she must be tired, because she didn't seem to sleep anymore. Every time he had gotten up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water or use the bathroom that week, the lights in his sister's bedroom were still on, and he could hear rustling about inside, working on something. Shh. He didn't have to be a genius to know that his sister was dealing with more than just insomnia. He had seen enough health videos at school to know that girls his sister's age were expected to start going through mood swings and changes. But Alex had become another person entirely. Something very serious was bothering her, and she was keeping it to herself. "Can I borrow some of your pencils?" a wide-eyed and wide-awake Alex asked him late one night. It was like a peacock asking to borrow some feathers. He wasn't certain how to handle the request. Surely she wasn't still doing homework at this hour. "Don't you have, like, hundreds?" Connor asked her. "Yes, but I've lost them all," she said. He shared the few that he had with her. Alex took them and quickly disappeared into her room again. She didn't even seem to mind that they were chewed on or were missing the erasers. The next night, Connor kept waking up to a peculiar humming coming from Alex's room. It was quiet, but had a strong vibration that he could feel as much as he could hear. "Alex," Connor said, knocking on his sister's door, "what is that sound? I'm trying to sleep, and it's driving me crazy." "It's just a bee. I shoot him out the window," a frantic Alex responded from behind the door. "A bee?" a puzzled Connor asked. "Yes, a very big bee. It's mating season, you know, so they're quite aggressive this time of year," Alex called out. All right," Connor said, and went to bed. But these things were nothing compared to the events during the next day at school. "Can anyone tell me the names of the rivers that ran through the Mesopotamia?" Mrs. Peters asked the class during a history lesson. As usual, she had no volunteers. "Anyone?" Mrs. Peters asked. Everyone was looking at Alex and expecting her hand to shoot into the air any second. But Alex was just staring at the floor. She wasn't paying any attention to anything. The Tigris and Euphrates," Mrs. Peters informed the class. "Can anyone tell me what the area between these two rivers is believed to be?" She asked the question in Alex's direction. But it was no use. Alice was lost in her own thoughts. "Miss Bailey, perhaps you know the answer?" Mrs. Peters pleaded. To what? Alex snapping out of her trance. The question? Mrs. Peters said. Oh. Alex said, no, I don't. She rested her head on her hand and continued staring at the floor. Mrs. Peters and the rest of the class didn't understand what was happening. Alex always knew the answers. How was the class going to function without her? The cradle of civilization, Mrs. Peters told the class answering the question. Men believe that mankind started there. Miss Bailey! Alex sat up quickly in her seat. The most shocking thing that ever happened in the classroom had occurred. Alex Bailey had dozed off in the middle of class. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Peters, Alex pleaded. I don't know what came over me. I haven't been sleeping very well lately. Mrs. Peters was staring at her as if she just witnessed a gruesome rural animal give birth. That's all right, the teacher said. Do you need to see the nurse? No, I'm fine. I'm just a little sleepy, Alex said. Promise that'll never happen again. Connor had been watching the whole thing like it was a train wreck. All he could do was shake his head. What had happened to Alex? Where was his real sister? She was turning into him. The strange humming sound Connor had heard the night before suddenly filled the classroom. Alex sat straight up in her seat, anxious. Her eyes grew larger than they had ever been before. A few of the students looked around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Can anyone tell me the technologies Mesopotamia brought into the Bronze Age? Mrs. Peter asked, oblivious to the humming. Anyone? She asked again. Alex's hand shot straight into the air. Yes, Miss Bailey? Mrs. Peters happily called on her. May I use the restroom? Alex peeped. Mrs. Peters sighed with disappointment. Yes, you may. Before she finished granting Alex permission to go to the restroom, Alex had already jumped out of the seat, grabbed her school bag, and headed out the door. Connor watched his sister leave. His eyes were bulging with suspicion. Why had she taken her backpack with her to the bathroom? He had to know what was going on. He was going to confront his sister here and now at school, where she had no place to run and no bathroom to lock herself into. Mrs. Peters? Connor called out. Yes, Mr. Bailey? Mrs. Peters asked. Can I see the nurse? He asked. What for? She asked. He hadn't thought this far into his plan. My elbow hurts, Connor said. Mrs. Peters stared at him blankly. She may have believed him more if he had told her he was a dinosaur. Your elbow hurts? She asked. Yes, really bad. I banged it on my desk and now it's just killing me, Connor said, clutching his perfectly fine elbow. Mrs. Peters squinted and rolled her eyes, two of her trademark indications of annoyance in one expression. Fine, but I'm going to have to write you a pass. Connor was out the door before she could finish her sentence. Meanwhile, Alex burst into the girls' restroom. She quickly looked underneath all the stalls to make sure she was alone. She opened her school bag, pulled out the Land of Stories, set it on top of a sink. It was glowing and humming more than ever. Please turn off, Alex said to the book. I'm at school. I can't get caught with you here. The sound and shine slowly faded. The Land of Stories returned to being just a normal book. Alex sighed with relief, but panicked once more when someone else suddenly charged inside the restroom. It was her brother. Bees don't have mating seasons, Alex, Connor said, with a tightened brow and his hands on his hips. I looked it up. They come from colonies, just like ants. Even the big ones. They don't have schedules. Connor, what are you doing in here? You can't be in the girls' bathroom, Alex shouted. I'm not leaving until you tell me what's going on, Connor demanded. You've been lying to me all week. I know something's up. I have twin tuition. Twin tuition? Alex asked sarcastically. I made it up, Connor said. It means I know when something's bothering you, even if you tell me nothing is. First, I thought you were having girl issues. Oh, Connor, please, Alex interjected. Then, after all the strange buzzing noises and late nights, I figured Mom must have gotten you a cell phone and didn't want me to know about it. But then I remember you have no friends, so who would you be calling and texting you? Alex grunted. Now he was being accusative and rude. But I know you well enough to know that it would take something much worse to make you act this way. Connor said, You're quiet? You don't know any of Mrs. Peters' answers? You're falling asleep in class? You're acting like me. So just tell me, what's your problem? Alex didn't say a word. She just stared at her feet. She was so ashamed at how she had been acting, but she knew no one believed her if she told them why she had been that way, except maybe her brother. Connor looked around the girls' bathroom. Gosh, it's so nice in here. The boys' bathroom looks like the bottom of a hazardous waste barrel. Wait, why do you have Grandma's book with you? I don't know what's going on. Alex burst into the loud, awkward tears one cries when exhausted and overly stressed. Connor took a step back for his own protection. He had never seen his sister so hysterical. At first I thought I was hallucinating, Alex said. I thought maybe I was having a reaction to something Grandma made for us for dinner. That was the first night it happened. But then it kept happening, so I knew it wasn't a reaction. Alex, what are you talking about? Connor asked. The Land of Stories books. Alex yelled. It glows. It hums. Every day it gets louder and brighter. I've lost so much sleep trying to figure out how and why it does it. It breaks all the laws of science. Ah, Connor said with raised eyebrows. Alex, I think we should go see the nurse. You must think I'm insane, Alex told him. Anyone would come to that conclusion unless they saw it themselves. But I promise I'm telling the truth. I don't think you're insane, Connor lied, starting to think his sister was definitely going insane. It happens once or twice a day, Alex said. I was afraid Mom would find it, so I brought it to school. The last thing she needs to worry about is a possessed book lying around her house. Connor didn't know what to say. He briefly imagined the future trips he and his mother would have to take to see his sister in the local asylum, and the wisecracks he would make about the cool white jacket she got to wear. Clearly, his sister had lost her mind. But after all they'd been through, he couldn't blame her. He kept thinking about how his dad would have handled the situation. What story would he have used to comfort Alex? Alex, Connor said with understanding eyes, we've been through a lot this last year. It's perfectly normal to feel overwhelmed, and the humming started again. They looked back at the Land of Stories on the sink. To Alex's relief and Connor's horror, it was glowing. Connor jumped back against the wall as if he were in the presence of an explosive. The Land of Stories book! Connor yelled. It glows! It hums! I told you, Alex said. Connor's mouth was open so wide, it was almost touching his chest. Is it radioactive? He asked. I doubt it, Alex told him. She reached for the book. Don't touch it, Alex, Connor shouted. Relax, Connor. Alex assured him. I've been dealing with it all week. Using one finger, she flicked the book open, and the entire restroom was illuminated. All the illustrations and the writing had disappeared, and the pages seemed to be made of pure light. Alex leaned closer to the book. Listen, do you hear that? I can hear birds and leaves. I never heard sounds come out of it before. Connor edged away from the wall and leaned down with his sister. The sounds of birds chirping and trees blowing in the wind echoed off the tile and porcelain in the bathroom. How is this possible? Connor asked. Are you sure it doesn't have any batteries or something? My most educated analysis with all means of science and technology is mine is that it's magic, Alex said. There's no other possible explanation. Do you think Grandma knows about this? Connor asked. She had the book for years before she gave it to us. Do you think this has happened before? I don't think Grandma would have given it to us if she knew what it was capable of, Alex said. You're right, Connor said. She still cuts up my meat whenever she comes for dinner, because she doesn't trust me with knives. There's more, Alex said. She reached into her school bag and pulled out a pencil. Carefully, she placed the pencil on the open book. It quickly sank into the glowing page and disappeared. Where did it go? Connor sputtered in utter astonishment. I don't know, Alex said. I've been dropping things into it all week. Pencils, books, dirty socks, and anything else I could find that I knew what I wouldn't miss. I think it may be some kind of portal. A portal to what? Connor asked. Alex didn't have an answer, of course. Of course, there was one location that she had hoped it might lead to. The twins leaned down even closer to the book, their noses almost touching it. They had to squint because it was so bright. Suddenly, a bright red blue bird flew out of the book. The twins screamed and ran around the room in panic. They bumped into each other, into the walls, and into the sinks as the bird zoomed above them. It was just as panicked as they were. Finally, Connor opened the bathroom door, and the bird flew out of the room and into the world. You didn't say things come out of it, too, Connor yelled. I didn't know! That's the first time that's happened! Alex yelled back at him. The book slowly dimmed and returned to normal. Connor's head was spinning. He couldn't believe all the things he had just witnessed. No wonder Alex was having a rough week. He now felt his own sanity might be slipping too. We have to get rid of this book, Connor exclaimed. After school, we should ride our bikes down to the creek and toss it in there so no one ever finds it. We can't get rid of it, Alex said. It's Grandma's book. It's been in our family forever. Birds are flying out of it, Alex. I'm sure she'll understand, he said. What if a lion or a shark comes out of it next? I know it drives you crazy when you don't know about stuff, but this is one matter you'd need to let go. It could be more dangerous than we think. Who knows what could happen? She knew her brother was right. But there was something about the whole situation that intrigued her past the point of reason. I think you're overreacting, Alex said. I don't want to get rid of it until I know more about it. She closed the book, put it in her school bag, and walked out of the restroom. Alex, don't walk away! Alex! Connor called out after her. The twins returned to class. All the students were silently reading their history books. Alex, we need to talk, Connor whispered. Mr. and Miss Bailey, please have a seat and read the chapter on Mesopotamia. Mrs. Peter ordered from her desk. Yes, Mrs. Peters, Alex said, and then turned back to her brother and whispered, We'll talk about it later, Connor. Connor let out a sound similar to something a bear would make. Mr. Bailey, how was the nurse? Mrs. Peter asked. There was no need. My elbow started feeling much better before I got there, Connor said, holding the other elbow than the one he had previously claimed was hurting. Mrs. Peters raised an eyebrow so high it was almost above her. The twins sat at their desks and opened their history books, but neither of them could actually read. Their thoughts were so loud it was impossible to focus on anything. Connor kept looking up at his sister, hoping she'd turn around so he could make some sort of gesture to make her understand how serious the situation was. Alex could feel her brother's eyes on the back of her head, so she remained facing forward, set on ignoring him, and then the worst possible thing that could have happened. The land of stories began humming in the quiet classroom from the inside of Alex's bag. She looked back at her brother, finally making eye contact. What they were doing again. Mrs. Peters had been so caught up in her lesson plan that she hadn't heard it earlier. Was it possible for her to miss it again? What is that noise? Mrs. Peters demanded. All of the students were looking around the room, wondering the same thing. Alex and Connor were terrified. They felt like their stomachs had fallen out of their bodies. Mrs. Peters got up from her desk and started searching around the room like a coyote sniffing out its prey. She walked up and down the aisles of desks, getting closer and closer to Alex. If anyone knows what that is, they'd better tell me before I could find it, the teacher warned. Alex could feel her heartbeat in her throat. There was no telling what could happen if her teacher found the book. She could only imagine what a fuss the school would have made of the discovery. Perhaps they'd call the local news station. Perhaps government officials would take the book away for experimental testing. Perhaps her family was taken away because they had been in such close contact with it. Mrs. Peters arrived at Alex's desk. Miss Bailey, is there something in your bag? She asked her. All the color in Alex's face drained away. She needed a miracle. Suddenly, a large history book flew from the back of the classroom, hit Mrs. Peters on the head, leaving a large dent in her curly hair. The entire class turned to the back of the room and saw Connor's extended hand. He had just thrown a book at their teacher. Mrs. Peters' face turned bright red. A charging bull would have seemed harmless compared to the way she was looking at Connor. Mr. Bailey, what on earth has gotten into you? She screamed. The whole school must have heard her. For a brief moment, Connor saw his entire life flash before his eyes. He honestly thought he was about to die. His face was so white, he was almost transparent. I'm sorry, Mrs. Peters, Connor whimpered. There was a bee. I didn't mean to hit you, he lied. Steam was practically coming out of the teacher's ears and nostrils. Detention, Mr. Bailey, for the rest of this week, next week, and the week after that, Mrs. Peters said. She returned to her desk and immediately began filling out every detention slip she had in her possession. Thankfully, the room had become so tense that everyone had forgotten about the humming sound, and even more thankfully, they hadn't noticed it slowly fade away. Connor's mission was accomplished. He knew he'd done the right thing, not as a student, but as a brother. Soon the bell rang and all the students left their desks and filed out of the classroom, except for Connor, who remained seated. Alex walked up to him. Thanks for that, she said. You owe me one, Connor told her. She nodded and left the classroom to walk home alone. Connor remained seated until Mrs. Peter finished out the detention slips. Come here, Mr. Bailey, she said. Connor approached her desk as if it were on fire. Throwing things in my class will never be tolerated. Do you understand me, Mr. Bailey? She said heavily, pronouncing each syllable of each word. One more incident like that, and I'll have you expelled. He gulped and nodded. She handed him a large stack of detention slips. Your mother will need to sign all of these, Mrs. Peter told him again. He nodded again. I'm really sorry, Connor said. I hope I didn't hurt you. He was so genuine that even Mrs. Peters could sense his regret. She knew that deep down, Connor had always been a good kid. A horrible student, but a good kid nonetheless. It's all right, Mr. Bailey. I believe I may have underestimated the effect your family situation has had on you and your sister. Going to contact your mother with a list of different after-school programs I think you and your sister should take part in, as well as a list of self-help books that may be beneficial. Connor nodded in agreement. I think if you had some place to escape to once in a while, it'd help you deal with whatever you're going through, she said. Connor continued nodding. If there was ever a time in his life when he needed an escape from reality, it was now, and he was sure his sister would agree. And then, like lightning, the thought hit him. Oh my god, Alex! Connor thought. She's going to travel into the book herself. That's why she's been holding on to it. That's why she refused to get rid of it. Connor dropped all the detention tips and bolted to the door. I'm sorry, Mrs. Peters. I can't go to detention today. Something has just come up. Mr. Bailey, get back here right now, she yelled after him, but it was too late. He was already gone. Connor was running so fast as he could down the street. Alex had gotten so much of a head start. Would he make it home in time to stop her? What if she had already gone by the time he got there? What if he never saw her again? His feet began to ache. Horrible pain grew in his side, and his heart felt like it was beating out of his chest. He continued running. He just prayed he wasn't too late. It had been more than 5 minutes since Alex had gotten home from the land of stories began acting up again. She ran up the stairs to her bedroom and promptly shut the door behind her. Alex took the land of stories out of her school bag and placed it on her bedroom floor. She opened the cover, and her room lit up from its golden glow. She smiled to herself. Alex had always hoped something magical would happen to her. Now something finally has. She pulled out a pencil from her school bag and placed it on top of the book and watched it disappear. Alex looked around the room for other disposable things she could drop into the book. She was out of pencils, and the books left in her bookshelves were the ones she wanted to keep. She looked down at her school bag. She did have plenty of school bags. She placed her whole bag on top of the book and watched it as it slowly sank into the storybook. Where were all these things going? Was it transporting them to another part of the world? Would she find a pile of her school supplies in India or China? Or did the book send these items someplace else entirely? Was it possible they were going to another world? Was it the world that Alex secretly hoped for? There was only one way to find out. It was an idea she managed to suppress all week. What if she went into the book? No, she couldn't possibly do such a stupid thing. What if she never came out? But what if she stuck her hand into the book? What would happen? Would it hurt? Would her whole arm disappear? Alex's curiosity overruled her caution. She sat on her knees and bent over the book very carefully. Alex started with just her fingertips. So far, so good. There was no pain. She only felt a warm, tingly sensation. Alex reached farther. She was wrist deep now, and still nothing had happened that worried her. She went farther. The book was up to her elbow. If the book hadn't been there, her hand would surely be sticking through the ceiling downstairs. Alex leaned forward even further, almost shoulder deep into the book. She moved her arm around, seeing if there was anything to grab onto it inside. Suddenly, her bedroom door burst open, and Connor ran inside, sweating out of breath. Alex, don't do it! He completely stalled her. Alex lost her balance and fell headfirst into the books. Alex! Connor cried out to his sister. He jumped onto the ground, trying to grab her foot before she disappeared entirely, but it was too late. Alex had fallen into the land of stories. So what do you guys think of that? Called it. Okay. Well, now they're gonna be stuck. Maybe Dad's in there. Alright. Okay. So you guys were correct. Yes, Alex does. She doesn't go into the book intentionally. She wants to try it bit by bit. But because she's startled by Connor, she ends up falling into the book. Now my question is, do you guys want me to read one more chapter? Or should I end it here and do it on another stream next time? More? Alright. I will read you guys one more chapter. Yes, she still went in. But it wasn't because she wanted to, yes, but she wanted to go bit by bit. She wanted to try it first, little by little. I'll read you guys one more chapter. We're going to read chapter 5. I'm giving myself hydration because reading is draining. For the throat mainly, but draining. So what do you guys think is going to happen in the next one? What's your prediction for what's going to happen next? I want to know what you guys think. I honestly don't know. You don't know? Okay. They land in a forest. Okay. We're probably going to meet someone who shows us around. Okay. So Sel thinks they're going to land in a forest. Now, mind you, so far only Alex has fallen into the book. Connor's not in the book, just Alex. You're probably going to meet someone who shows us around. Okay. Anyone else have any ideas? Assuming she didn't randomly open the book, it should be a forest. Connor jumping. Okay. Well, remember, the book doesn't show anything on the page when she opens it. It's just a bright illumination of thing. It doesn't show anything that's on there. There's no illustration, there's no words, nothing. There's nothing on there. Connor jumping. Oh yeah, Connor's going in too. He gotta save his sister. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. But remember, this is just a random part in the book. They didn't open the book and have an illustration of a forest there or anything. They didn't have an illustration of like rivers or a castle or anything like that. There's no illustration of that in the actual book. Because when it's illuminated, there's no words, there's no pictures. Nothing. It's just the light coming out of the book. So what do you think? You both think currently that Connor is going to go in the book because he wants to save his sister. And Abel thinks that someone's going to show them around. And Sel thinks that they're going to land in a forest. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and continue with chapter 5. This is chapter 5. From the Mouth of a Frog. Alex was no longer in her bedroom. She was falling into a world of light. She fell farther and farther, faster and faster. She was dizzy and scared. She screamed out for help, but she couldn't hear her own voice. Would she ever stop falling? Was she going to die? Was she dead? She wondered if she would ever see her family again. She could hear birds chirping and trees blowing in the wind. The noise seemed to get closer and closer. But she kept falling and falling, not knowing where she was falling to. Ouch, Alex said, hitting the ground. Her impact was hard enough to hurt, but not hard enough to seriously injure her. Had it not been for rough landing, she would have thought she was dreaming for sure. Alex quickly got to her feet. She felt her pulse to make sure her heart was still working. She was still alive, from what she could tell. She was so thankful to have finally stopped falling. But where exactly did she fall to? She was standing on a dirt path in the middle of a thick forest. The trees were tall and dark, with bright green moss covering their trunks. The sun's rays shined through a light mist. Birds squawked from high in the trees, and if she listened closely enough, she could hear a tiny stream in the distance. Alex spun around, looking in all directions. Her breathing increased as she took in her new surroundings. Was she overreacting, or not reacting enough to what had just happened? And what exactly had just happened? She looked up to see if there was an opening she had fallen through, hoping to see some sort of window into her bedroom. but all she saw were tree branches and the sky above her. Where am I? She asked herself. Ah! As if he had fallen right out of thin air. Connor landed hard on the ground beside his sister. He was pale and screaming, and his limbs were stretched out in all directions. Am I alive? Am I dying? Am I dead? He asked from the ground with his eyes tightly closed. You're alive, Alex told him. She had never been so happy to see him. Alex, is that you? Connor asked. He slowly opened his eyes one at a time and looked around. Where are we? He asked as she helped him to his feet. It looks like some kind of forest, she said. It was unlike any forest they had ever seen in real life, at least. The colors were so vivid and the air was so crisp. It was as if they had fallen into a painting. A painting Alex was positive she had seen before. Look, Connor said, pointing at the ground. All of our pencils. The path was littered with pencils Alex had been dropping into the book all week. She also found her school bag and a few of her dirty socks in the middle of the mess. But where were all the books she had dropped into the land of stories? So this is where they all went. But where is here? Connor asked. How far away from home are we? Alex couldn't answer him. She was starting to become just as worried as he was. They were worse than lost. This is your fault, Alex, he said. My fault, Alex yelled. We wouldn't be here if you had just knocked on my door instead of barging in like that, like the house was on fire. I knew you were planning this. I just had to stop you. I wasn't planning on going into the book. I was just testing it out, Alex explained. You didn't have to follow me here. Oh, sure. Was I just supposed to leave you in the book by yourself? He exclaimed. Was I supposed to tell Mom when she got home? Hi, Mom. Hope you had a good day at work. Alex fell through a book. By the way, what's for dinner? Give me a break. Connor began jumping upward as high as he could. What are you doing? Alex said. Wait, we fell from somewhere up here. There's got to be a way back, he said, but all his jumping was pointless. Connor eventually tired himself out, and he took a seat on the ground against a tree trunk. What if we were transported to another country or something? Connor asked. His forehead became more wrinkled the further he thought about it. What if it took us to Canada or Mongolia or somewhere? How long is it going to take for Mom or someone to find us? Suddenly, the ground started shaking. A powerful rumbling had consumed the forest. The branches of the trees shook, and the small rocks on the ground began jumping as something massive moved closer towards them. What's happening now? Connor yelled. Let's take cover, Alex said. She grabbed her bag, and the twins ran off the path and into the forest a little way and took refuge behind a particularly wide tree. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A huge cavalcade of soldiers on white horses rode past them. Their armor was clean and shiny. They carried green and silver shields with large red apples painted on them and waved flags with the same design. Alex, did we go back in time? Connor anxiously asked his sister. That looks like something straight out of the medieval times. The pencils were all obliterated under the horses' hooves. The soldiers were moving at such a fast and forceful pace that none of them noticed the awestruck twins peeking out from behind the tree. Alex was fixated on their shields. A red apple was such an odd thing to be displayed on a shield. But there was something so familiar about it. She couldn't put her finger on it. The rumbling slowly faded away as the soldiers disappeared down the dirt path. The twins both stayed behind the tree for a few moments, making sure the coast was clear. I don't know about you, but I've had about as much excitement as I can handle for one day, Connor told Alex. A poster pinned to a nearby tree caught Alex's eye. She walked over to it, pulled it off the tree for further inspection. It was old, with faded writing, and a picture of a disgruntled-looking little girl with curly blonde hair was centered on it. The poster read, Wanted, dead or alive, Goldilocks, for burglary, thievery, and running from the law. Alex's face went white. She stopped breathing for a moment. She had realized where they were. No wonder the trees had been so recognizable. She had seen pictures of them so many times growing up. The book had taken them to the exact place she had hoped for. Is it possible? She asked herself. The wheels in her head had never spun as fast as they were now. Is what possible? Connor asked. Do you know where we are? I think so, Alex told him. Where? Connor asked, fearing the answer. Connor? We went into the book, she explained, but he wasn't following her. I think we're actually in the land of stories. She handed him the wanted poster and he read it. His eyes grew as wide as lemurs. No, this can't be happening. This is crazy, he said, shaking his head. He handed the poster back to his sister as if it were infected with rabies. He couldn't believe what she was saying. He didn't want to believe what she was saying. Are you telling me we're in the fairy tale world? I'd recognize this forest anywhere. It's straight out of Grandma's book, Alex said with an unplanned smile. But it makes perfect sense. Where else would it have taken us? We just fell through a book. Nothing makes sense, Connor said. So are we stuck here or what? How do we get home? I don't have all of your answers, Connor, Alex said. Don't forget, all of this just happened to me too. Connor began pacing around the trees with his hands on his hips. I can't believe I ditched detention and wound up in another dimension, he said. Alex was rather grateful her brother had come after her. They had lived together all their lives and had been in the same classroom since kindergarten. She didn't know if she could handle being in a different dimension by herself. I hope you're happy, Alex, Connor said. I told you we should have thrown the book into the creek. Enough with the blaming, Alex said. It doesn't matter how we got here. The point is we're here now. What matters is finding someone who can help us get home. Excuse me, may I help you? Said a proper voice behind the twins. They jolted at the sound of another voice besides their own. They turned around to see who it was, see who it had come from. And once they saw, they both wished they hadn't. Standing behind Alex and Connor was what could best be described as a frogman. He was tall, with a wide face, big glossy eyes, and shiny green skin. He wore a dapper three-piece suit and carried a large glass jar of lily pads. Forgive me for eavesdropping, but I'm rather good with directions if you need some, he said with a very wide smile. Alex and Connor were so petrified that they were paralyzed. If they needed any more evidence that they were in the fairy tale world, this was their proof. You look awfully young to be in the forest by yourselves, the frogman said. Are you lost? Connor let out a high-pitched squeal that lasted much longer than it should have. Please don't eat us, he said, and dropped to the ground in a fetal position. The frogman looked down at him with a frown. Young man, I have no intention of eating you, he said. Is he always like this? The frogman asked Alex. Alex responded with a squeal, almost identical to the one her brother had made. I know, don't worry. I'm used to people screaming at me. The frogman told them. Get it out of your systems. The shock will only last a minute. We're sorry, Alex finally managed to say. It's just that where we're from there aren't many, frog people. Sorry if that isn't politically correct term for what you are. Connor let out another high-pitched noise. It wasn't a scream this time, but it was embarrassing nonetheless. The frogman studied their faces and paid special attention to their clothes. Where are you from? Where exactly are you from? Pretty far from here, Alex said. Piercing set of wolf howls echoed through the forest. All three of them jumped at the sound. The frogman looked around the trees with fear in his big glossy eyes. It's getting dark, the frogman said. We better get inside. Please follow me home. It's just a few minutes' walk from here. Nice try, Connor said. The wolf howls echoed again. This time they were much louder than the first. Wherever the wolves were, they were getting closer. I know I look scary now, said the frogman to the twins, but I'm nothing compared to some of the creatures that lurk around these woods at night. I promise I will not harm you. There was such concern in his eyes. It was hard not to trust him. The frogman took off at a brisk walk deeper into the forest. Alex nudged Connor. We better follow him. Are you crazy? I'm not going home with the giant frog, Connor whispered to her. What do we have to lose? Alex asked. Besides our lives, Connor said. But despite his protest, he was dragged by his sister and pulled into the direction the frogman was leading them. The twins hurried behind the frogman for a good while. They zigzagged between trees, jumped over boulders and tree roots that stuck up from the ground. The deeper they went into the forest, the thicker the trees became. It got dark very quickly, and was almost pitch black by the time they reached the frogman's home. Alex and Connor stayed close together. With every step, they second-guessed that they made the smart choice going with the strange creature. This way, he said. The frogman brushed aside some dead vines growing over a large wooden door that was camouflaged into the side of a small hill. He pulled the door open and led the hesitant twins underground. He looked back into the forest, making sure they hadn't been followed, before shutting the door behind him. It was very dark underground. Alex and Connor were so close together, they could have been mistaken for Siamese twins. Forgive the mess. I wasn't expecting company, the frogman apologized and lit a lamp with a match. Alex and Connor didn't know what to expect of the frogman's home, but what they were seeing definitely wasn't it. They were in a large room with dirt walls and a low dirt ceiling. Roots from a tree growing above them grew down like a chandelier. A cluster of big, cushy chairs and sofas, many of the cushions and had the stuffing sticking out of them, sat in the center of the room and were angled to face a small fireplace. Nearby, teacups and pots hung from the hooks over a tiny kitchenette. To Alex's delight, there were books everywhere. Shelves of books lined the dirt walls. Piles of books were stacked on every available surface and on the ground. It was as if the room were infested with literature. "Connor," Alex whispered close to him, "look around at this place. It's like we're having our own Lucy and Mr. Tumnus moment." Connor looked around and saw what she meant. "If he offers a Turkish delight, I don't care what you say, we're getting out of here," he whispered back. "It's a little dirty, but it's cozy," the frogman said. "It's hard to find a landlord who will house a frog, so I did the best I could with what I had." He placed his jar of lily pads on the mantel and immediately started a fire in the fireplace. He filled a tea kettle with water from a pitcher, placed it over the fire, and took a seat in a big white chair closest to it. He crossed his legs and folded his hands neatly in his lap. He was one proper frog. "Please have a seat," the frogman said, gesturing to the sofa in front of him. The twins reluctantly did as he asked. The sofa was rather lumpy, so they had to shift around in their seats to get comfortable. "What are you?" Connor asked the frog. "Connor, don't be rude," said his sister, elbowing him in the side. "It's quite all right," the frogman said with a complicated smile. "I understand my appearance takes some time to get used to. Even I haven't fully adapted to it yet." "You mean you weren't always a, frog person?" Alex asked as politely as she could. "Heavens no," the frogman said. "I was cursed years ago by a very aggressive witch." "Why?" Alex asked. She was fascinated by how casually he had said it. "To teach me a lesson, I suppose," the frogman told her. "I used to be a very vain young man. The witch transformed my appearance so I would lose all of the things I took for granted." His wide smile softly faded. It had obviously been a very long and painful experience for him, and he still had a sad sense of loss and longing about him. The twins had never seen a frog look so sad. "I can't even imagine what that must have been like," said Alex, beaming with sympathy. "Can we call you Froggy?" Connor asked with a small smirk. "Connor!" Alex reprimanded. "It's quite all right," the frogman nodded, and his smile returned. "I've learned that more people embrace their disadvantages, the less disadvantaged they become. Please, call me Froggy. I'd prefer it." Connor shrugged and smiled. "May I get you some lily pad tea?" Froggy asked the twins. Both the twins nodded. They didn't want to be rude. Froggy retrieved the tea kettle from the fire and hopped, literally, to the kitchenette and poured water into 3 teacups. He opened the jar on the mantel and dropped a lily pad into each teacup and stirred. "Do either of you take flies with your tea?" he asked, reaching for another jar on his mantel. This one filled with dead flies. "No thanks," Connor said, trying to quit. "Suit yourself," Froggy said, and dropped a few flies into his tea. He handed them each a teacup and reseated himself across from them. They stared down at it for a few minutes before deciding what they at least pretend to drink it. "What are your names?" Froggy asked the twins. "I'm Alex, and this is my brother Connor." A large and happy smile came to Froggy's face. "Are you by any chance Alex Bailey?" Froggy asked, grinning from ear equivalent to ear equivalent. Yes?" Alex was shocked. How did this amphibian know who she was? "As in, this book belongs to Alex Bailey?" Froggy asked. He leaned over the side of his chair and pulled up a stack of books, opening one to show where the phrase was written inside. "Those are my books!" Alex said, excitedly, recognizing the books she had dropped into the land of stories. "I was wondering what had happened to them." "It was so peculiar," Froggy explained. "I was out collecting flies and was walking down the path to the swamp when one just fell from the sky and landed on my head. I returned the next day and found several more in the same spot. It was the oddest thing that's ever happened to me." "You mean besides being turned into a frog, right?" Connor asked. "Because if I were you, that would be on the top of my list." "Ouch!" Alex elbowed her brother. Froggy ignored Connor and went on with his explanation. "As you can see from my shelves, I love to collect books, especially when I'm not expecting to. And these books were unlike any I had ever read. They described people and places I had never seen or heard of, and I thought I had seen it all. The authors wrote about such interesting places. Could you imagine a world without witches or trolls or giants? What imaginations! Froggy chuckled at the thought of this. The twins laughed along with the best fake laughs they could muster. Please keep them. I have duplicate copies at home, Alex told him. Froggy was delighted to hear this. Uh-huh. Connor cleared his throat. Speaking of home, I don't mean to interrupt this little book club, but we're very lost and would like to know where we are. Froggy's glossy eyes went back and forth between the twins, watching them closely. Oh, Tridden, you wouldn't be here if you knew where you were. Froggy said, You're in the Dwarf's Forest. He had expected to get some sort of worried reaction from the twins, but Alex and Connor just stared up at him with very little expression. The Dwarf Forests? Alex asked. What are the Dwarf Forests? You've never heard of them? Froggy asked, completely appalled. The twins both shook their heads. Sorry. It's a very dangerous place, Froggy told them. It's the only designated area of land without a ruler or government. It's a kingdom where everyone is their own king. It used to be populated by dwarves who worked in the mines, but now it's full of criminals and fugitives mostly. It's a place where people go when they don't want to be found. Knowing that they had not only traveled into another world, but were in a dangerous part of that world did nothing to help the twins' anxiety level. Are there other kingdoms? Alex asked. Froggy was stunned. It was as if he had asked him what color the sky was. However, he seemed to be enjoying their unfamiliarity. Of course, he said. There's the Northern Kingdom, the Sleeping Kingdom, the Charming Kingdom, the Corner Kingdom, the Fairy Kingdom, the Red Riding Hood Kingdom, the Elf Empire, the Dwarf Forest, and the Troll and Goblin Territory. How can you possibly not know this? This was difficult for the twins to wrap their heads around. How big was the fairy tale world? Their puzzled faces inspired Froggy to hop out of his seat and cross to one of the bookshelves and return with a large rolled-up scroll. He handed it to the twins, and they unrolled it. It was a large, detailed map of the new world they were in. The fairy tale world was a wide continent bordered by mountain ranges and covered in forests with castles and palaces and villages scattered all around. The Northern Kingdom was the largest of the kingdoms and took up most of the map. The second largest was the Charming Kingdom, spread across to the south, and the third largest was the Sleeping Kingdom, which stretched along the east. The Dwarf Forest covered the majority of the west. The tiny Corner Kingdom was tucked away in the southwest corner of the continent. The northwest corner was the Elf Empire. In between the Charming Kingdom and the Sleeping Kingdom was the Fairy Kingdom. And just above that was the Troll and Goblin Territory. The Fairy Kingdom looked beautiful, as if it was very colorful and seemed to sparkle on the map. The Troll and Goblin Territory looked frightening and appeared to be surrounded by large boulders and rocks, preventing anything from going in or coming out. In the very center of it all was the Red Riding Hood Kingdom, circled by an unmistakable brick wall of gigantic proportions. Alex and Connor couldn't believe it. The world they had grown up hearing about was real. It was all real. It was bigger and better than they had ever imagined. Alex couldn't help but get emotional. Tears began to flood her eyes. Together, all the kingdoms create the happily ever after assembly, Froggy explained. The happily ever after assembly, Connor asked, with a slight touch of sarcasm in his voice. It's the organization formed to uphold the treaty all the rulers signed so that all kingdoms could live in peace and prosperity, Froggy told them. Sounds like our United Nations, Alex whispered to Connor. All the kingdoms have their own traditions and celebrated histories, Froggy went on. And there are kings and queens, I'm assuming? Connor asked. Oh yes, Froggy said. The Northern Kingdom is ruled by Queen Snow White. The Corner Kingdom is watched over by Queen Rapunzel. The Sleeping Kingdom, formerly known as the Eastern Kingdom, but renamed after the dreadful curse under which it was placed, is governed by Queen Sleeping Beauty. And of course, the Charming Kingdom is ruled by King Charming and his wife, Queen Cinderella. Wait, are these the current monarchs? Alex asked, with a spark of excitement in her eyes. You mean Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty? They're all still alive. Of course they are, Froggy said. Oh my goodness, that's wonderful, Alex said excitedly. Isn't that wonderful, Connor? Whatever, Connor mumbled. How old do you think they are? Froggy asked. Queen Snow White and King Charming have only been married a few years. Queen Cinderella and King Charming are expecting their first child soon. Queen Sleeping Beauty and King Charming are sadly still trying to restore their kingdom to consciousness after that horrible sleeping spell was placed under. Wait, are you saying all these queens are married to the same guy? Certainly not, Froggy said. There are 3 King Charmings. They're brothers. Of course, Alex said. Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty all married Prince Charming. There's more than one. How come I never thought about that? Connor's eyes were fixated on the map. He kept searching for some kind of road or bridge that would lead them back home, but he found nothing. Why are there a bunch of rocks around the troll and goblin territory? Connor asked. As punishment, Froggy said, trolls and goblins are nasty creatures and have a habit of kidnapping people and turning them into slaves. The Fairy Council forced the trolls and goblins into one territory, and none of them are allowed to leave without permission. Fairy Council? Alex asked. The world was almost too good to be true. Yes, they're a group of the most powerful fairies of the kingdoms, Froggy explained. Cinderella's fairy godmother is one of them. So is Mother Goose, and all the fairies that blessed Sleeping Beauty when she was a baby are on it too. They rule the fairy kingdom, and they are the leaders of the happily ever after assembly. Is the Red Riding Hood kingdom under some sort of punishment too? Connor asked. Why is there a huge wall built around it? Alex looked down at the map and back up at Froggy, equally curious. That was a result of the Crawl Revolution. What was the Crawl Revolution? Alex asked. The citizen riots against wolf liberty, Froggy explained. The Red Riding Hood Kingdom used to be a group of villages in the Northern Kingdom that were constantly under attack by wolves. They begged the evil queen, Snow White's stepmother, who was on the throne at that time, to help them. But the evil queen was too occupied with her vanity, so they revolted and started their own kingdom. They built a huge wall around it, so no wolves could get in. And now Red Riding Hood is the queen? Alex asked. Yes, she's the only elected queen in history, Froggy said. The villagers figured her story was the most symbolic of their struggle, so they chose her to lead them. But isn't she just a little girl? Alex asked. No, she's a young woman now, a very self-obsessed young woman from what I hear. After all, she named the kingdom after herself. Her grandmother does most of the decision-making while she takes all the credit, Froggy said. Unfortunately, the Crawl Revolution only led to the rise of the Big Bad Wolf Pack. The Big Bad Wolf Pack? Connor asked. Yes, they're the descendants of the original Big Bad Wolf. They travel around terrorizing villages and attacking unsuspecting travelers, Froggy said. Oh, joy, Connor said sarcastically. I'm sorry I asked. But besides that, things are very peaceful throughout the kingdoms, Froggy said. His voice drifted off, and uncertainty grew on his face. That was until a week ago. The twins leaned forward. What happened a week ago? The evil queen escaped from the dungeon of Snow White's palace, Froggy told them. I thought everyone had heard. It's news to us, Connor said. That can't be good, Alex said. How'd she escape? No one knows, Froggy said. She just vanished, along with her magic mirror. Snow White's army has been searching throughout all of the kingdoms for her. They pass through the woods at least twice a day. So far they found nothing, not even a footprint to lead them in her direction. Do you think they're going to find her? Connor asked. I hope so, Froggy said. She's a very dangerous woman. She's the only queen in history to lose her throne. I couldn't imagine the revenge she must be seeking. Who knows what she's planning to do next? Alex suddenly became very tense. It had just occurred to her that, along with all the characters she had grown up loving, all the ones she had hated and feared actually existed too. It made her feel very uneasy and very unsafe. The fire in the fireplace began to fade, and Froggy got up to add another log. The twins' eyes and mouths were wide open, and their heads were spinning from all this new information. Exactly how far away do you live from here? Froggy asked as he sat back across from them. The twins looked at each other, back at Froggy, and then back at each other. They didn't know what to tell him. Would he believe them if they told him the truth? It's practically a different world, Connor said. Alex shot him a dirty look and then nervously laughed, trying to make light of what her brother said. Froggy wasn't laughing. He sat up straight in his seat, and his face grew very still with intensity in his eyes, as if he had just found the solution to a mystery. Interesting, Froggy said, eyeing the twins back and forth. Because if I didn't know better, just from the way you dress and the way you speak and the way you were so surprised at basic history, I would say that there was a very good chance you are indeed from a different world. They didn't understand what he was trying to say. Did he just know something that they didn't? Just out of curiosity, have you ever heard of another world? Alex asked him. Or preferably how to get back to it, Connor added. Froggy studied their faces even more intently for a moment. He got up again and went to a bookshelf on the far side of the room. He rustled through the books, looking for something of special interest. Finally, he found it. A small leather-bound journal with a red band around it. Have either of you heard of the wishing spell? Froggy asked the twins. Alex and Connor shook their heads. Froggy flipped through the pages of the journal. I assume not, he said. It's a legendary spell comprised of a list of items, and apparently when you put the items together, you are granted one wish. It doesn't matter how extravagant the wish is, the wishing spell will grant it. Many people believe that it's only a myth, and I did too, until I found this journal. What does this journal have to do with anything? Connor asked. It was written by a man from the Charming Kingdom, Froggy said. He managed to discover what these items were, and he recorded his journey to find them. His one wish was to reunite with the woman he loved, and in the journal he claimed she lived in another world. Alex and Connor sat straight up. They were sitting on the edge of their seats without realizing it. I thought the man writing the journal was crazy. I didn't believe another world could exist. Until I began finding your books, Alex. And then when I saw you bickering in the forest, I knew you two were different, Froggy said. I knew you had to be from the place the man had written about. The twins were happy that the truth was out. Froggy seemed genuinely excited about the whole thing. Did he make it? Alex asked. Did the man cross over into the other world? He must have, Froggy said. The journal ends when he found the last item. Froggy handed the twins the journal and took a seat in his chair. Wherever you're from, if it's a home that you wish to get back to, I think your best chance is following this journal. The twins went silent for a moment. They stared down at the journal in hands with immense hope. What items do the spell require? Alex asked. All sorts, from all over. But the journal gives great instructions on where and how to find them. Some of them are very dangerous to get to. Of course they are, Connor said. Typical. If the spell will grant whatever wish you want, why didn't you search for the items and wish to be human again? Alex asked Froggy. Froggy thought about it for a moment. It was a question he had asked himself many times, and he was ashamed of the answer. I've kept the journal all these years, in case I ever decided to, Froggy explained with difficulty. But searching for the items would mean I would have to face the world looking like this, and frankly, children, that's something I'm not ready to do. It's something I don't think I'll ever be able to do. He spoke from a place of deep sadness. Clearly he wasn't finished learning the witch's lesson yet. It's getting late, Froggy said. Why don't you sleep on it and decide what you want to do in the morning? You're welcome to stay here as long as you'd like. Thank you, Alex said. I hope we aren't a bother. No bother at all. Froggy smiled earnestly. Froggy got them a large blanket to share. He blew out all the lamps and put out the fire in the fireplace. Alex and Connor tossed and turned with thoughts of the wishing spell all night. But there was no decision to make. If the journal offered a possible way home, they would have to do anything and everything it instructed them to do. They had no choice. They were about to embark on the greatest scavenger hunt of their lives. That's chapter 5, everyone. Boring, I know, Frogman. Lower, the Princess of Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White actually have names, but I like how they're all charming, though you won't forget them. Grandma's Evil Queen, she's on the run. She's definitely gonna make a reappearance later. What's the grandma's husband? Oh my goodness, I love it. Well, there you go. That's technically 6 chapters if you include the prologue. My voice is now shot for the next couple hours. Can't believe we have to wait for the next part. Yes. You'll have to wait for the next part because my voice is currently shot. So we'll see when the next part is. Maybe we'll do this on another Friday, next Friday or something. But you all have a great day. I thank you for stopping by. Thank you, MD, for the lurk. We're going to go ahead and raid someone was a good cliffhanger. We left on a good part though. Yes, because now you have to wait for the journey to begin. Oh, okay. Cool, MD. We're gonna go ahead and raid a channel. I don't know what channel we're gonna raid, considering there's not a lot of people to raid. Because I don't think there's a lot of people streaming at this current moment in time. But we will see who is streaming right now. Let's see. What do you all want to watch? Me still here. Kazu? Is Kazu streaming? Oh, Kazu's streaming. Okay, for sure. We can raid Kazu. Okay. Kazu is playing Grand Theft Auto right now, so we can go ahead and raid him. I thank you all for stopping by and joining the book with me. And I hope you all have a wonderful time in Kazu's, and see you all next time.